I put my bridal bouquet into my sister's hands while she stood in a white dress at the back of my veranda. For one strange second, Brittany looked more frightened than pleased. My mother, on the other hand, was still smiling. I raised the wireless microphone I had taken from the sound table and looked past all three of them toward the guests who had twisted around in their chairs to see why the bride had appeared before the processional had even started. Let's give Mom and Dad the bridal moment they planned. The room went so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning inside the glass conservatory. My father's expression tightened. My mother's smile stayed in place, but only technically. Behind them, the videographer lowered his camera for half a second, adjusted his grip, then raised it again. He was still recording. Before I tell you how my own parents ended up standing beside my sister while she held my bouquet and wore white to my wedding, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from today. Stay with me, because what happened in those few minutes turned out to be only the beginning of what I discovered about my family. And if you enjoy stories about families, boundaries, and the moment people finally stop playing the roles others assign them, subscribe to the channel and stay with me through the end. It has been about 11 weeks since that Saturday at the end of May, and I still remember how warm the stems felt against my palm before I handed the bouquet over. I remember the smell of roses and greenery, the pressure of my wedding band that was still waiting to be placed on my finger, and the look on Brittany's face when she realized I was not going to scream at her. I wish I could tell you that I had planned that moment. I hadn't. I had no secret speech prepared, no elaborate trap waiting behind the curtains, and no idea yet how much planning had happened on the other side. What I had was about 30 seconds and a growing certainty that my family desperately wanted me to lose my temper. The ceremony was being held at a wedding estate outside Columbus, Ohio. Nathan and I had chosen a glass conservatory for the vows, with white chairs arranged on either side of a center aisle and tall windows looking over the late spring gardens. Guests were already seated when I waited in the rear staging foyer behind a pair of opaque double doors. The wedding party had mostly taken their places. Nathan was at the front with the officiant, unable to see what was happening behind those doors. I was 38 years old. I had spent months planning that wedding with Nathan, and more importantly, we had paid for it ourselves. There was no check from my parents hanging over my head. No threat that they could pull funding if I did not let them make decisions. I had wanted that independence because I knew my family, although at that point I still did not understand them nearly as well as I thought I did. The coordinator was checking the processional order when my mother came into the staging foyer, looking unusually pleased with herself. Then Brittany appeared behind her. My sister was 33, 5 years younger than me, and she had always known exactly how to make an entrance without appearing to try. But that afternoon, there was no pretending the effect was accidental. Her dress was white, not champagne, not pale blush, not silver under bad lighting, white. It was fitted through the waist, formal enough to photograph like a bridal gown, and close enough in color to mine that my brain needed a second to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Brittany stopped when she saw my face. "Lauren," she said. That was all. My mother stepped beside her and smiled, as if she had just solved a seating problem. "She should walk before you," Mom said. "It'll be beautiful." I stared at her. Most people imagine that when something outrageous happens, you immediately know what you feel. I didn't. My first reaction was physical. My grip tightened around the bouquet. My shoulders went rigid. Heat moved up the back of my neck, and for one sharp moment I could hear almost nothing except my own breathing. Then my mind started working. My mother was not looking at Brittany. She was looking at me. That was the first thing that felt wrong. If this had been nothing more than one of Brittany's selfish choices, my mother should have been watching her, smoothing the dress, checking her hair, admiring the spectacle she had helped create. Instead, her eyes were fixed on my face as if she were waiting for something. My father stepped closer before I'd even said a word. "Lauren," he murmured, "don't make a scene." That was the second thing. I looked at him. I haven't said anything. Craig, my father, had spent most of my life presenting himself as the calmer parent. Mom pushed. Dad softened. Mom made a cutting remark. Dad found me later and explained what she had really meant. Mom started a fight. Dad sighed and told everyone to move on. I had believed for years that he was the person who kept things from getting worse. Yet there he was, warning me not to create a scene before I had created one. Brittany shifted her weight. "Can we just not do this right now?" she asked. I looked at her dress again. "Do what?" Her mouth tightened. Mom gave a small laugh. "It's a dress, Lauren. Please don't turn this into something it isn't. There are sentences that only become revealing when you notice when they were spoken." At the time, I did not have language for what bothered me about that one. Now I do. Nobody had accused her of anything. Nobody had even started an argument. And somehow my mother was already defending herself. The coordinator stood a few feet away with her tablet pressed against her chest. I could see discomfort in her face. But she was being professional enough not to insert herself into a family dispute unless I asked. Through the narrow opening beside the doors, I could see the rear edge of the ceremony space. One of my cousins had turned toward the noise and lifted her phone, probably because she sensed something unusual was happening. At the time, I noticed it only as one more pair of eyes, waiting to see what I would do. Beyond her was the videographer. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, filming the final pre-ceremony entrances from the rear angle Nathan and I had paid for. There was nothing secret about his camera. Nothing suspicious. He was simply doing his job. But suddenly I understood something that had nothing to do with him. Whatever happened next was going to have witnesses. Mom knew it. Dad knew it. Brittany knew people were listening. And all three of them were looking at me. I could almost feel the shape of the reaction they expected. Maybe I would demand Brittany change. Maybe I would yell. Maybe I would tell her to leave. Maybe I would cry loudly enough for the guests to hear and give my father the opportunity to put his hands on my shoulders and say, "Lauren, calm down." Every one of those reactions would have been understandable. And somehow, standing there in my wedding dress with my own sister dressed in white, I realized that being understandable was not the same thing as being useful to me. I looked through the opening toward the sound table near the rear aisle. There was a wireless handheld microphone resting beside the audio equipment. The coordinator followed my gaze. "Lauren?" she whispered. I handed her nothing. Asked for no permission. I opened the door. Mom caught my arm. "What are you doing?" I looked at her hand until she removed it. "You wanted Brittany to walk before me." Mom hesitated. "Yes, but we can just discuss it back here." That almost made me laugh. A few seconds earlier, she had been perfectly comfortable proposing the idea. The moment I decided to let other people see it, suddenly it needed to become a private conversation. I stepped into the rear aisle. Several guests turned immediately. Then more followed them. Within seconds, the soft murmur in the conservatory had changed. People were looking past me toward the foyer, where Brittany stood in white beside my parents. I picked up the microphone. The coordinator came after me, but I shook my head once. Not because I was angry with her, because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. "Absolutely," I said into the microphone. "Come up here." Brittany's eyes widened. Mom's expression changed for the first time. Only slightly, but I saw it. She had expected resistance. Instead, I was inviting them forward. "Lauren," Dad said behind me, "don't make this ugly." I turned toward him. "I'm not." I agreed with Mom. A few guests shifted in their chairs. I did not raise my voice. I did not call my sister selfish. I did not tell anyone that my mother had lost her mind. I simply stood at the rear entrance of my own ceremony and waited. Brittany looked at Mom, not at me. Mom gave her a tiny nod. That detail stayed with me long after the wedding. Brittany came forward. I walked toward her until only a step separated us. Up close, I could see that she was not enjoying herself nearly as much as I had expected. Her jaw was tight. Her breathing was shallow. She looked embarrassed, but not embarrassed enough to have changed the dress before walking into my wedding. That distinction mattered. I held out my bouquet. She did not take it. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Giving Mom what she wanted." "Lauren." I pushed the stems gently into her hands. Her fingers closed around them automatically. Then I turned toward the guests. "Let's give Mom and Dad the bridal moment they planned." A few people actually inhaled at the same time. I will never forget the sound. Not laughter. Not applause. Just the collective recognition that something was very wrong. I gestured toward my parents. Come on, you should be in the picture too. Mom stared at me. Dad's mouth became a flat line. Lauren, Mom said quietly. I kept my voice calm. Mom, you wanted Brittany to walk before me, right? She had choices then, but none of them were good. She could deny it in front of the coordinator, my father, my sister, and several members of the wedding party who had just heard her say it. Or she could admit it. Her smile returned, brittle around the edges. I just thought it would be a sweet idea. There it was. Not an apology. Not a misunderstanding. En admission. A sweet idea, I repeated. I moved slightly to one side. Then stand with her. Mom looked around the room. That was the moment the humiliation changed direction. A woman in white holding my bouquet was no longer the entire picture. Now the picture included my parents standing beside her, having publicly claimed the idea as their own while the actual bride stood a few feet away. Dad understood it before Mom did. This is ridiculous, he muttered. I looked directly at him. You told me not to make a scene. I'm not making one. He had nothing to answer. The videographer was still filming. I did not know then that those few minutes would matter again later. I did not know what would be in the footage, or when I would receive it. At that moment, I cared about something much simpler. I wanted my wedding back. I stepped toward Brittany and held out my hand. She looked down at the bouquet. For an instant, she seemed as if she might refuse. Then she gave it back. Our fingers touched around the stems. I remember that more clearly than I remember half the ceremony. Her hands were cold. Thank you, I said. Then I looked toward my parents, the guests, and the coordinator. Now I'd like to get married. The coordinator moved immediately. She guided us back through the opaque doors and began resetting the processional. It took only a few minutes, although at the time it felt longer. Brittany was moved out of the position Mom had tried to give her. Dad stopped talking after the coordinator firmly reminded everyone that the ceremony order had already been finalized. Mom stood near the wall with her lips pressed together and refused to look at me. I did not argue with any of them. That surprised me almost as much as it surprised them. My hands were shaking now that the confrontation was over. I adjusted my grip on the bouquet and stared at the closed doors. Through them came the faint music that had been chosen months earlier. Nathan was somewhere on the other side waiting for me, with no idea why the processional had been delayed. For a moment I wanted to tell him everything before I walked down the aisle. Then I decided my parents had already taken enough time. The music changed. The coordinator looked at me. Ready? I took one slow breath. Yes. The doors opened. This time, when the guests turned toward me, Brittany was not standing in front of me with my bouquet. My mother was not directing the moment. My father was not warning me about my behavior. There was just the aisle, the people Nathan and I had invited, and Nathan waiting at the other end. His face changed the second he saw me. All the tension I had been holding loosened just enough for me to smile. I walked toward him. That is the part of my wedding I choose to remember first now. Not the white dress. Not my mother's smile. Not my father telling me not to make a scene. Nathan reaching for my hand. The officiant quietly asking if I was all right. Me answering yes and meaning it. The ceremony continued. We exchanged vows. We exchanged rings. People laughed where they were supposed to laugh and cried where they were supposed to cry. For those few minutes, my family did not control the room. Nathan and I did. By the reception, Mom had rebuilt her public expression. She greeted relatives, complimented the flowers, posed for photographs, and behaved as though what had happened before the ceremony had been some tiny misunderstanding. Everyone should be polite enough to forget. Dad caught me once near the edge of the ballroom. We'll talk later, he said. I was holding a glass of water and watching Nathan laugh with one of his friends. No, I said. Not tonight. Dad frowned. Lauren, I'm getting married today. Whatever you want to explain can wait. I walked away before he could answer. That, too, was new for me. For most of my adult life, when my parents said something needed to be handled, I handled it. When Brittany needed something fixed, I fixed it. When Dad had a problem with insurance, paperwork, a contractor, a late payment, or some form he did not understand, my phone rang. When Mom needed someone to organize an appointment, compare prices, untangle a bill, or calm everyone down, she called me. I used to be proud of that. I thought competence was one of the ways people loved me. If I could solve the problem, why wouldn't I? If something would take me 15 minutes and take my parents an afternoon, why not do it? If Brittany was overwhelmed, and I was not, why not step in? It took me years to understand that every time I removed a consequence for them, I taught them something about me too. I taught them that my time was available. My knowledge was available. My money, within reason, was available. And most dangerously, I taught them that I would usually clean up the problem before asking why it had become mine. 6 weeks before the wedding, I had finally started changing that. It happened at a family dinner on a Saturday evening in April, at my parents' house in the northern suburbs of Columbus. Nothing dramatic had happened yet. No white dress, no microphone, no wedding guests turning in their chairs. Mom had made dinner. Dad had complained about a bill. Brittany had arrived late. Nathan sat beside me, quiet enough that my parents probably assumed he was not paying much attention. I remember looking around that table and realizing I was tired of being the most useful person in the room. Not unloved, not helpless, not trapped. Just finished with a role I had participated in, maintaining for far too long. I put my fork down. "There's something I need all of you to understand before the wedding," I said. My mother looked up first. And even now, knowing everything I know, I can still remember how ordinary her face looked before I said it. 6 weeks earlier, I had told my parents one sentence they never forgave me for. It had nothing to do with Brittany's dress. The sentence I told my parents 6 weeks before my wedding was not dramatic. I did not slam my hand on the table or announce that I was cutting anyone out of my life. We were halfway through dinner at their house in the northern suburbs of Columbus, and my father had just pushed his phone toward me because he had received another notice from his insurance company about paperwork connected to a roof repair. He wanted me to call on Monday, figure out what they were asking for, and make sure the contractor got paid before another deadline passed. Normally, I would have taken the phone, opened my calendar, and handled it without thinking. Instead, I slid it back across the table. "I can send you the number and tell you what to ask," I said. "But I'm not calling for you." Dad looked at the phone as if I had returned something broken. "You already know how this stuff works." "I do, so it'll take you 10 minutes. "That's not the point." Mom stopped cutting her chicken. Brittany glanced up from her plate, and Nathan, sitting beside me, did nothing. I appreciated that more than I knew how to explain at the time. He did not put his hand over mine, jump in to defend me, or turn the conversation into a husband versus in-laws standoff. He knew I had decided to say this myself. Dad leaned back. "Then what is the point?" I took a drink of water before answering. I had rehearsed the basic idea in my head, not because I was afraid of my parents, but because conversations with them had a way of escaping their original subject. A missed insurance form could become a discussion about gratitude. A loan could become a referendum on loyalty. A simple no could somehow end with me defending a decision I had made 5 years earlier. "The point is that, after the wedding, I'm not doing this anymore," I said. "I'm not fronting money for adult expenses, and I'm not taking over paperwork people can handle themselves." Mom's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Brittany actually laughed once. "Wow." I looked at her. "What?" "Nothing. It just sounds very official." "It's clear. It sounds like you're writing a company policy." Dad's expression hardened. "Exactly. We're your family, Lauren, not one of your operations teams." That was the irony. I managed logistics for a living, so solving complicated problems quickly was one of the things I did best. My family praised that ability whenever it helped them, then called me cold or controlling whenever I stopped using it on their behalf. "I'm not treating you like employees," I said. "I'm telling you what I'm available for." Mom put down her fork very carefully. "Where is this coming from?" "Nowhere dramatic. People don't make announcements like this for no reason. I'm getting married in 6 weeks. Nathan and I have been talking about how we want our household to work. I realized I've been taking care of things I don't actually need to be responsible for. Mom's eyes went immediately to Nathan. He kept eating. That annoyed her more than if he had challenged her. So this is about Nathan? No, you just said you two talked. We talk about our lives. That's what couples do. Dad exhaled through his nose. I knew this was going to happen. Nathan finally looked up. What was going to happen? Dad waved one hand. Marriage changes people. Suddenly everything has to be separated. His family, her family. His money, her money. I answered before Nathan could. This is my decision. Mom turned back to me. We have never asked you to support us. That was technically true in the narrowest possible sense. My parents had never sat me down and said, Lauren, please become our financial support system. They did not need to. The requests always arrived individually, wrapped in urgency. The roof deductible was higher than expected. Dad's car needed a repair the same month the property tax bill came. Mom's medical deductible landed after an expensive Christmas. Brittany was short after moving apartments and would pay me back as soon as things settled. None of those requests, by itself, was outrageous. That was why it had taken me so long to notice the pattern. If my parents had demanded half my salary, I would have refused immediately. Instead, they asked for manageable amounts at moments when saying yes seemed more efficient than watching everyone panic. I didn't say you asked me to support you, I said. I said I'm not fronting money anymore. Dad gave a short laugh. Fronting money. Listen to yourself. What would you call it? Helping your parents. Fine. I'm not automatically helping with expenses you can cover or plan for yourselves. Mom's face changed. She was not angry yet. Hurt came first with her, or at least the appearance of hurt. After everything we did for you growing up, there it was. I had known some version of that sentence was coming. I set down my fork. Raising me wasn't a loan, Brittany whispered. Jesus. Mom stared at me. I didn't say it was. You brought up raising me because I said I'm not paying adult expenses anymore. I brought it up because you're talking about family like it's a ledger. I'm not keeping score. I'm stopping a pattern. Dad's jaw shifted. We never asked you to keep score. I remember that sentence because it would matter later. At the time, it irritated me mostly because it missed the point so completely. I was not sitting there with a spreadsheet demanding repayment. I had no intention of billing my parents for old emergencies. I was not even angry about most of the individual times I had helped. The problem was that emergencies had become a system. And systems did not stop just because everyone involved preferred to call them accidents. Brittany leaned back in her chair. You always do this. I looked at her. Do what? Make family sound like work. You mean when family gives me work? Oh, come on. No, explain it. Mom immediately turned toward Brittany. Honey, you don't need to get involved. That was another familiar move. Brittany could throw the first stone and somehow still become the person Mom needed to protect. Brittany ignored her. You make everything sound exhausting. Helping Dad with insurance. Helping Mom with bills. Helping me when I needed it. Nobody forced you. She was right about one thing. Nobody had forced me. I had chosen to lend Brittany money, deal with Dad's contractor, and help Mom untangle bills because I could do those things quickly. That was my part in the pattern. But somewhere along the way, voluntary help had become expected access. You're right, I said. Brittany blinked. She had expected an argument. I did choose to help, I continued. And now I'm choosing differently. Mom's eyes narrowed. Brittany looked almost offended by the calmness of it. So, if I have an emergency, you're just going to say no? If you have an actual emergency, I'll decide what I can do. That's not what you just said. It is exactly what I just said. I'm not automatically fixing adult problems because I'm the person who can do it fastest. Brittany shook her head. You always make it sound like everyone is incompetent except you. That one landed because there was enough truth in it to hurt. I had never believed my family was stupid. But I did believe I was better at certain things, and I had not exactly hidden that belief. I was faster with contracts, better with deadlines, better at staying calm when a bill looked wrong or a company representative gave a vague answer. I like turning confusion into a sequence of solvable steps. There was pride in that, and sometimes more pride than I wanted to admit. Dad pointed at me, as if Brittany had finally named the issue correctly. That right there. What? You think you're the only adult in the room? No, I think you're adults. That's why I'm asking you to handle your own things. Nathan looked down to hide what might have been the beginning of a smile. Mom noticed. This isn't funny. He didn't say anything, I said. He doesn't have to. There was no useful answer to that, so I did not give one. For a few seconds, only silverware moved. Outside the dining room windows, the April evening was still pale enough to see the new leaves on the trees behind the house. Mom had put yellow tulips in the center of the table. I remember them because the whole room looked so ordinary. That was always one of the strangest things about the turning points in my family. They rarely happened in dramatic places. They happened beside grocery store flowers and half-finished glasses of iced tea. Mom finally looked at Brittany. She's had a lot on her plate this year. I almost laughed. Nobody had been talking about Brittany anymore. But there it was anyway. What does that have to do with anything? I asked. Mom's tone sharpened. I'm saying your sister has needed support. So have you and Dad. And you never have? I have. I just don't usually call all of you to solve it. Brittany rolled her eyes. Mom gave me the look I had seen since childhood, the one that meant I had failed some test of generosity she had never explained. You've always been stronger than your sister. For years, I had taken that as a compliment. That night, something about it sounded different. Stronger had meant less comfort when I was hurt, more responsibility when things went wrong. Fewer excuses. Higher expectations. It had also meant everyone assumed I could absorb one more inconvenience without consequence. I did not understand all of that yet. I only knew I was suddenly tired of being praised for needing less while being asked to give more. I don't want being strong to mean I'm permanently available, I said. Mom's expression went blank for half a second. Then she smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Nobody said permanently. Dad picked up his phone again. Forget the insurance. I'll figure it out. Good. He looked at me as if I had insulted him. That reaction told me more than the argument had. If he truly wanted independence, my answer should have been a relief. Instead, he heard it as rejection. Dinner never recovered. Brittany started talking about something at work. Mom responded too brightly. Dad barely spoke to Nathan. I finished eating because I refused to be pushed out of the room by a conversation I had started. That was another change in me. An earlier version of myself would have stood up, gathered my coat, and left as soon as everyone became uncomfortable. I used to think walking away meant I was refusing drama. Sometimes it did. Other times, I was simply leaving my mother alone with the room and letting her explain what had just happened in whatever way suited her. That night, I stayed until dinner was over. Nathan and I left together just after 8. The drive back to Columbus took around half an hour. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. Streetlights moved across the windshield in slow intervals. I was not ashamed of what I had said, but my body still carried the residue of the argument, the tightness in my shoulders and the restless energy that made me want to replay every sentence and optimize it after the fact. Nathan waited until we merged onto the main road. Do you regret it? No. That was fast. I've been thinking about it for months. I know. I turned toward him. Then why ask? Because knowing you decided something and knowing how you feel after saying it out loud aren't the same thing. That was Nathan. He rarely tried to improve my answer for me. I looked back through the windshield. I'm irritated. With them? With myself. For what? For making this sound harder than it should be. Dad can call an insurance company. Mom can compare a bill. Brittany can budget for her own life. Nathan nodded. Yes. I don't understand why I kept doing it. I do. I looked at him again. He kept his eyes on the road. Because you're good at it. That sounds like a compliment. It is. That doesn't mean it's harmless. I waited. He said, Your family doesn't treat you like the favorite. They treat you like infrastructure. I almost laughed because the word sounded ridiculous in a conversation about parents. Infrastructure? The thing nobody praises because they assume it'll work. Until it doesn't. That's dramatic. Is it? Yes. You just told 5 adults that you're no longer doing their administrative work. Four. He glanced over. You included me? I was counting myself. That got a real laugh out of him. The tension in my chest loosened, but I still did not accept his point. I chose to help them. I know. They didn't trick me. I didn't say they did. They're not helpless. That's actually my point. I folded my arms. Nathan continued. You solve things because you hate watching preventable problems get worse. That works at your job. At home, it means everyone knows you'll eventually step in before the consequence gets expensive enough. I did not answer immediately because I knew he was right about at least part of it. My entire career was built around preventing small problems from becoming larger ones. A missed shipping document could strand a load. A forgotten renewal could shut down a vendor relationship. A vague responsibility usually became an expensive one. At work, intervening early was intelligence. I had never seriously considered that doing the same thing in my family might be teaching them not to intervene at all. Still, I pushed back. They're my family, Nathan. I know. You make them sound calculated. I'm not saying they sit around plotting which problem to hand you next. I'm saying they know the system works. That sentence stayed with me. The system works. At the time, I thought he meant the money and paperwork. Months later, I would understand that my mother had built another kind of system entirely. The drive home also brought back a memory I had not thought about in years. Maybe it was Mom calling Brittany the one who needed support. Maybe it was the word stronger. Whatever triggered it, I suddenly remembered my college graduation dinner. I had been 22. My parents had taken us to a restaurant after the ceremony. I still had the crease from my graduation cap pressed into my hair, and I remember being exhausted in the satisfied way you only are after finishing something you have worked toward for years. Brittany was 17 and had been dating a boy from her high school. He broke up with her that afternoon. By dessert, she was crying. I did not blame her for crying. She was 17. Everything at 17 feels permanent until it isn't. What I remembered was Mom moving her chair closer to Brittany and spending the rest of the meal comforting her. Dad drove Brittany home early. My graduation cake was boxed up. At some point, I had looked annoyed. Mom noticed. Can't you let one night not be about you? Even then, I knew how absurd the sentence was. It was my graduation dinner. But I had swallowed the answer because Brittany was crying, and because I had just graduated college, and because Mom was right about one thing. I could handle disappointment better than Brittany could. For years, I remembered that dinner as proof that I was mature. Sitting in Nathan's car 16 years later, I saw another possibility. Maybe I had simply learned that being the stronger daughter meant being the daughter whose turn could always be interrupted. When we reached our house, Nathan carried in the leftovers my mother had insisted we take. I went straight to my office instead of changing clothes. There was one thing I wanted to do before the evening ended. At work, I had a rule that people liked to tease me about. If it matters, put it in writing. Not because I assumed everyone was dishonest. Because memory was messy. People remembered tone instead of terms. They remembered what they meant instead of what they said. A clear written confirmation saved everyone trouble later. My family hated that habit. Dad called me corporate. Brittany once told me I could make a birthday reservation sound like a legal settlement. I opened the family text thread. I kept the message short, just confirming what I said tonight so nobody has to guess later. After the wedding, I'm not going to front money for routine expenses or take over paperwork, bills, insurance calls, contractor issues, or other things each adult can reasonably handle themselves. If there's a real emergency, call me and I'll decide what I'm able to do. This isn't punishment, and nobody needs to pay me back for old help. I'm just changing what I take responsibility for going forward. I read it twice. Nathan appeared in the doorway. You drafting a treaty? I looked at him. He grinned. Sorry. Family resemblance. Get out. He laughed and went toward the kitchen. I sent the message. Mom answered within 4 minutes. We understand perfectly. I hope someday you understand how painful it is to hear your own daughter describe helping her family as a burden. I stared at the screen. That was classic Mom. She did not disagree with a single boundary. She changed the subject from what I was willing to do to how my willingness made her feel. I did not answer. Dad read the message. No response. Then Brittany texted me privately. "You're really doing this right before the wedding?" I typed, "Doing what?" "You know Mom's already stressed. My wedding is 6 weeks away. I'm allowed to make decisions about my life 6 weeks before it." "She thinks you're angry." I told her exactly what I'm doing. "You sound angry." "I'm not." 3 dots appeared, vanished, then appeared again. Finally, Brittany wrote, "Whatever. I'm not getting in the middle." I looked at that sentence longer than I should have. Brittany had been in the middle throughout dinner. But I had no interest in another argument. I put the phone down. What I did not do was create a secret folder labeled evidence. I did not screenshot the texts, because I expected a future confrontation. They remained in my phone because I did not routinely delete conversations, and because written confirmations were simply how I lived. That habit would matter later. At the time, all I felt was relief. I had said what I needed to say. I had been clear. I believed clarity would protect me from being misunderstood. That was one of my mistakes. Before Nathan and I had left my parents' house that evening, there had been one small moment I almost forgot completely, until after the wedding. Nathan was already carrying our things toward the car. I had gone back through the dining room because I left my phone charger beside an outlet. The rear door leading to the covered porch was partly open, and Mom was outside with her phone pressed to her ear. I recognized my Aunt Diane's name when Mom said it. I was not trying to listen. I was several feet away, and already turning toward the hallway when Mom lowered her voice. "No, I know," she said. "I'm worried about how she's acting lately." I stopped. There was a pause. Mom glanced toward the glass door, and I moved before she saw me standing there. At the time, I assumed she was complaining about the money conversation. It annoyed me, but it did not surprise me. Nancy had always processed conflict by calling someone else and explaining what the other person had really meant. So I picked up my charger, went outside through the front door, and got into Nathan's car. 6 weeks later, when I saw Brittany standing behind my mother in a white dress, I would remember that call. But even then, I still would not understand what Mom had been preparing Diane to believe. After that dinner, my family did something I had not expected. They stopped asking me for things. For the first 2 weeks, I almost took it as proof that the conversation had worked. Dad handled the insurance issue himself. Mom did not forward me a medical bill and ask what a code meant. Brittany did not text me about rent, a car repair, or anything else that required money or problem solving. The family group chat returned to ordinary wedding questions, restaurant recommendations, and photos Mom kept sending of dresses she was considering for the ceremony. Looking back, the silence should have bothered me more. At the time, I was relieved. Nathan and I were 6 weeks from getting married, and there was plenty to do without managing anyone else's problems. We were finalizing the seating chart, confirming transportation, reviewing the reception timeline, and dealing with the 1,000 small decisions that seemed to appear only after we thought everything important had been settled. The wedding itself was not extravagant by some standards, but it mattered to us. We had saved for it. We knew exactly what we could afford. The conservatory outside Columbus was beautiful without needing much decoration, and Nathan and I had deliberately kept control of the contracts ourselves. Every vendor had my number, his number, or both. My parents were not authorized to make changes. That had been intentional even before the dinner. I had learned enough from smaller family events to know that Mom interpreted access as permission. If a florist asked a question, she answered it. If a restaurant wanted a head count, she gave one. If someone said, "We can do either option," Mom heard, "Nancy should decide." So, I had made the wedding boringly clear. Nathan and I were the clients. Everyone else was a guest. Mom complained about that once. "You make it sound like we're strangers," she said. "No, I make it sound like we're the people getting married." She gave me one of those smiles that meant she had decided not to fight because she thought fighting would make her look unreasonable. I knew that smile. I just underestimated what she did with the resentment after she swallowed it. About 3 weeks before the wedding, Mom called while I was leaving work. She did not ask about money. She asked about Brittany. Have you two talked lately? I shifted my laptop bag higher on my shoulder as I walked toward the parking garage. About what? Nothing in particular. Then yes, we've texted. There was a pause. She seems worried about the wedding. That stopped me. Why? I don't know. She's sensitive. What is she worried about? Mom sighed as though I were being difficult. Lauren? I said I don't know. You brought it up. I'm trying to make sure everyone gets through the next few weeks without unnecessary tension. I stood beside my car and unlocked it. What tension? Another pause. Then Mom laughed lightly. You always need everything defined. Yes. I'm just saying weddings bring out emotions. That sounds like something people say before telling me what they actually mean. Her voice cooled. Brittany sometimes feels like you judge her. There it was. Not Brittany said. Brittany feels. Close enough to sound personal. Vague enough that Mom could retreat if I asked for details. When did she tell you that? Why are you interrogating me? I asked one question. I'm your mother, Lauren. I shouldn't need to give you a transcript every time I try to help. I opened my car door but did not get in. If Brittany has a problem with me, she can tell me. She doesn't want conflict before your wedding. Then there isn't a problem. Mom exhaled. This is exactly what I mean. What exactly do you mean? You make everything so black and white. I almost smiled at the irony. Mom, you called me to tell me Brittany is worried about something, but you won't say what. If she has something to tell me, she knows my number. You don't have to be so defensive. I'm not defensive. You sound defensive. I recognized the loop before I entered it. I have to drive, I said. Talk later. I ended the call. That conversation stayed with me, mostly because it accomplished nothing. Mom had not given me information. She had given me a feeling and then left me to decide whether the feeling belonged to Brittany or to her. An earlier version of me would have called Brittany immediately and said, Mom says you think I judge you. That would have started a conversation with my mother sitting invisibly in the middle. I did not do it. If Brittany wanted to talk, she could. For several days, she did not. Then she sent me a picture of a pair of gold earrings and asked whether they worked with her dress. The dress in the photo she had previously shown me was dark green. The earrings were fine. They'll work, I wrote. She sent a heart. No conflict. No anxiety. No hint that she believed I judged her. I remember staring at the exchange and thinking Mom had probably exaggerated something Brittany had said in passing. That explanation was easy because I had used it for years. Mom exaggerated. Dad avoided. Brittany reacted. Ihenl. Everybody had a role. The week before the wedding, the small oddities started accumulating. None of them was enough to mean anything alone. Dad called me on Tuesday afternoon and asked what time the wedding party needed to arrive. I told him his arrival time. He said, No, I mean when does everything actually start? You have the schedule. I'm looking at it. It says guests seated by 3:30. Processional at 4. Then you have your answer. What time do you walk? I frowned. At 4. No, I mean in the order. Last. He laughed. I know that. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a second. Nothing. Your mother has me confused with all the timing. That was believable. Mom could turn a 5-minute sequence into a military operation if she thought a family photograph was involved. I let it go. 2 days later, our coordinator emailed Nathan and me confirming the final ceremony sequence. She included a note that my father had asked whether the family entrances were being recorded from the rear or the front. I read the line twice. Nathan was at the kitchen counter making coffee. Did Dad ask you anything about the videographer? He shook his head. No. I turned my laptop toward him. He read the email. Why does he care where the camera is? Probably Mom wants to know which side to face. Nathan raised an eyebrow. That sounded convincing even to you? No. He gave the screen another look. Do you want to call him? I thought about it. No. Why not? Because if there's an innocent explanation, I'll get another lecture about being suspicious. If there isn't, I want to see what he does. Nathan looked at me for a moment. That was different from how I would have handled things a year earlier. Before, I would have confronted the first strange detail because I hated uncertainty. I liked answers. I liked closing loops. But my family had taught me something I had not yet learned to apply consistently. When people knew you wanted clarity, they could sometimes satisfy you with explanations before you had enough information to test them. So I waited. The coordinator later clarified that Dad had not asked her to move the camera or change anything. He had only wanted to know where the videographer would naturally be during the processional. That mattered. It meant there was nothing sinister about the camera itself. He was not secretly arranging surveillance. But it also meant he had cared enough to ask. The next odd moment came at the rehearsal. Brittany arrived almost 20 minutes late. Mom defended her before I said anything. Traffic was awful. I checked the time. I didn't say anything. Mom looked irritated. I know that look. What look? The look where you're keeping track. I stared at her. We have a coordinator keeping track. That's literally what a rehearsal is. Brittany stepped between us. Can we please not? Again. I had not started anything. That realization was becoming difficult to ignore. It was as though everyone around me had begun responding to a version of Lauren who had already done something. The real Lauren was standing there, trying to understand what crime her imaginary counterpart had committed. We rehearsed the entrance. My parents would walk together before the wedding party. Brittany had no special role in the processional. She was my sister, but she was not a bridesmaid. That had been her choice months earlier. She said being a bridesmaid sounded like too many responsibilities, and I had accepted that without argument. Now, during rehearsal, Mom asked the coordinator whether Brittany could walk closer to the family entrance. The coordinator looked at me. No, I said. Mom smiled. I'm only asking, and I'm answering. Brittany folded her arms. I don't care where I walk. Good, I said. Then we're done. Mom shook her head. There's no reason to be sharp. I looked at Nathan. He had seen it too. I had said no. Normal volume. One word. Mom had supplied the hostility herself. Later, while the coordinator reviewed reception transitions, Dad pulled me aside. Your mother is stressed. So am I. I know. He lowered his voice. Just try not to take everything personally this week. My stomach tightened. What exactly am I supposed to take personally? Nothing. Then why are you warning me? Dad looked toward Mom. She was standing with Brittany near the entrance, talking quietly. You know how personalities clash. Whose personalities? He gave me a tired look. Lauren. No, say it. I'm trying to keep the peace. That's not an answer. He rubbed the side of his face. Just don't let something stupid ruin your wedding. I remember the sentence almost word for word. Something stupid. Not if something happens. Not if there is a problem. Something stupid. As though an event had already been assigned a category before it happened. I should have pressed harder. I didn't. Not because I was afraid. Because my wedding was 2 days away, and I was not willing to spend the rehearsal forcing my father to explain a warning he clearly did not want to explain. That choice still bothers me a little. Not because confronting him would necessarily have stopped anything. I doubt it would have. But because I can see now that I was still making one familiar mistake. I was assuming that if something truly important were happening, the people involved would eventually become direct. My family was rarely direct when indirectness gave them more power. Friday night, I slept badly. Nathan and I had agreed not to stay together the night before the wedding, mostly because we liked the old-fashioned ritual of seeing each other at the ceremony. He stayed with his brother. I stayed in the bridal suite at the venue with one of my closest friends, Claire, who had helped me with logistics throughout the week. Claire knew enough about my family to notice when I became quiet. You're thinking about them, she said. I was sitting at the vanity removing makeup. Is it that obvious? You've wiped the same spot under your eye 4 times. I dropped the cotton pad. I think they're expecting me to do something. Who? My parents. At your wedding? I don't know. That was the problem. I told Claire about Dad asking where the videographer would stand. Mom's strange call about Brittany. The rehearsal. The warnings not to react before there was anything to react to. Claire listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, What do you think they're planning? I don't know if they're planning anything. That wasn't my question. I stared at myself in the mirror. I think Mom wants Brittany to have some kind of moment. Like what? I don't know. Speech? Maybe. Announcement? Could be. Proposal? She's not dating anyone seriously. Claire leaned against the dresser. Then whatever it is, don't give them more than they bring. That was good advice. I nodded. If something happens, I deal with the thing that happens, not the history behind it. Exactly. I slept better after that. Saturday morning arrived bright and warmer than the forecast had promised. By noon, the conservatory glass was reflecting green from the gardens outside, and everyone seemed to be moving twice as fast as necessary. I focused on concrete things: hair, makeup, dress, shoes, bouquet. The ordinary mechanics of getting married were comforting because each one had an answer. My phone stayed mostly face down. Mom texted twice, asking whether I needed anything. I said no. Dad sent a photo from the venue parking area with the message, "Beautiful day." Brittany sent nothing. Around 2:30, Claire came into the bridal suite carrying coffee. "Your mom is asking where you are." "In the bridal suite." I told her that. What did she say? Claire imitated Mom's bright voice. "I know, but is she staying there until the processional?" I stopped adjusting my earring. "Why?" I asked. She said she was just checking. There it was again. Checking what? I looked at the time. Guests would begin arriving soon. "Tell the coordinator I'm staying here until she moves me." Claire nodded. "And nobody changes the processional." "Already told her." I smiled. "This is why I like you." By 3:30, guests were seated. My pulse had finally settled. The coordinator came in and reviewed the sequence one last time. My parents would be positioned near the rear staging foyer, shortly before the processional. Wedding party entrances would follow. I would remain behind the opaque doors until my cue. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. At 3:40, Dad appeared. He was already dressed, tie straight, boutonniere pinned. For a moment, he looked like the father I had wanted that day. He looked at me and smiled. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." His eyes softened. I almost felt foolish for being suspicious. Then he glanced toward the foyer. "Everything okay?" "Yes." "Good." He kissed my cheek. As he turned away, he asked the coordinator, "He's filming from back here, right?" She answered. "For the opening entrances, yes. Then he'll reposition." Dad nodded. He saw me looking at him. "What?" "Nothing." He smiled. "Don't start analyzing everything today." I felt the old irritation rise, but I let it go. "Not today." At 3:48, Mom entered. She looked elegant in deep blue, exactly the color we had discussed. She smiled when she saw me. Then she checked her phone. "Brittany's here." "Good." Mom looked toward the door. She was delayed. "That's fine." Another glance at me. I almost asked why she was studying my face. Before I could, the door behind her opened. Brittany stepped into the foyer. For 1 second, my brain registered only details. Hair pinned low, small gold earrings, bare shoulders, white fabric. Then the whole image assembled. My sister was wearing a white dress to my wedding. Not the dark green dress she had shown me. White. The coordinator stopped moving. Claire went completely still. Brittany looked at me, then immediately at Mom. And Mom smiled. Not at Brittany. At me. "She should walk before you," she said. "It'll be beautiful." My fingers tightened around my bouquet. Before I had said a single word, Dad stepped toward me. "Lauren," he said quietly, "don't make a scene." That was when all the strange little moments of the previous week stopped looking separate. Mom warning people about my sensitivity. Dad asking about the camera. The questions about timing. The rehearsal. The warnings. The expectation. I still did not know why they wanted me angry. But standing there with my sister dressed in white, and both my parents already prepared for my reaction, I finally understood one thing. They had been waiting for me to break. I did not know yet how long they had been waiting, or what story they intended to tell afterward. But standing in that rear staging foyer with Brittany dressed in white, I finally understood why the past week had felt as though everyone was reacting to an argument I had not started. Mom had been warning people about my sensitivity. Dad had been asking about the processional and the camera. Now both of them were positioned around me as if my anger were not merely possible but scheduled. For a few seconds, I let myself feel exactly what they expected me to feel. I was furious at Brittany for wearing white, furious at Mom for trying to put her into the processional ahead of me, and more disappointed in Dad than I could process. But Dad was the part that made me stop. He had warned me not to make a scene before I had raised my voice, moved, or even decided what I wanted to say. Then the strange moments from the previous week started lining up. Dad asking where the videographer would stand. Mom talking about my sensitivity. The rehearsal, where she accused me of being sharp after I had answered one question with one word. Dad telling me not to take things personally. Mom asking whether I would stay hidden in the bridal suite until the processional. Each detail had seemed harmless on its own. Together, they felt different. I looked at Brittany. She was not watching me. She was watching Mom. Then I looked at Mom. She was not admiring Brittany's dress or acting surprised by the situation. She was studying my face, waiting. Dad had already positioned himself beside me, like the calm parent preparing to control an emotional daughter. Except I had not done anything. That was when anger stopped being the most useful thing I had. I still did not know why they wanted a reaction. I knew nothing about Diane's email, Dad's messages to Brittany, or the story Mom would later tell about my financial boundaries. But I could see what they expected. If I screamed, I was jealous. If I threw Brittany out, I was controlling. If I cried and delayed the ceremony, I was unstable. If I refused to walk until she changed, I was the one ruining the wedding. Even if every guest understood why I was angry, my parents would still have the picture they seemed to want. Brittany standing quietly while Mom and Dad tried to manage Lauren. I realized then that being justified was not the same as being strategic. They expected resistance. So I would agree, not because I approved, but because agreement would force ownership back onto them. If Mom wanted Brittany to walk before me, she could say so where everyone could hear. If Dad wanted everyone calm, he could stay calm while his own participation became visible. If Brittany wanted to wear white, she could experience what that choice looked like without me giving them a meltdown to hide behind. For years, my family had been good at making me react first and explaining themselves afterward. This time, I decided to reverse the order. I loosened my grip on the bouquet and looked at Mom. "You wanted Brittany to walk before me." "Yes," she said. "I just thought it would be special." "Okay." Mom blinked. Dad frowned. Brittany finally looked directly at me. None of them had expected agreement. That was how I knew I had found the right move. So I looked at Mom and said, "You wanted Brittany to walk before me." "Yes," she said, then softened her tone. "I just thought it would be special." "Okay." Mom blinked. Dad frowned. Brittany finally looked directly at me. I turned toward the double doors. Mom caught my arm. "What are you doing?" I looked down at her hand until she removed it. "You wanted Brittany to walk before me." Mom glanced toward the coordinator. "Yes, but we can just discuss it back here." That was the moment I knew I had made the right decision. Seconds earlier, the idea had been beautiful. Now that other people might see who had suggested it, suddenly it needed privacy. I opened the door. The coordinator stepped after me. "Lauren, I'm fine." I meant it in a very specific way. I was furious, but I was not confused anymore. Anger was manageable once I had a problem I could define. I stepped into the rear aisle entrance before the processional had officially begun. The first guests turned because they saw movement. Then more noticed the bride standing where she was not supposed to be yet. Murmurs moved through the rows. The sound technician looked up. I pointed toward the wireless microphone. "I need this for a second." He hesitated only long enough to look at the coordinator. She gave the smallest nod. He handed it to me. Behind me, I heard Dad say my name. I did not turn around until I had the microphone in my hand. Brittany was still in the foyer. Mom stood beside her. Dad had followed me through the doors. "Lauren," Dad said, "don't make this ugly." I looked at him. "I'm not." I agreed with Mom. His expression changed. That was the first moment I saw genuine uncertainty on his face. I turned toward Brittany. "Absolutely," I said into the microphone. "Come up here." The murmur in the conservatory stopped. Brittany's eyes widened. Mom did not move. I waited. "Come on," I said. Brittany looked at Mom. Mom gave her a tiny nod. Even now, that gesture bothers me more than almost anything else from that day. Brittany was 33 years old. She did not need permission to refuse. She could have walked back out the side door, changed clothes, or told Mom the entire idea had gone too far. She did none of those things. She walked toward me. That was her choice, and I never excused it later just because I eventually learned she had not known everything. When she reached me, I held out the bouquet. She stared at it. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Giving Mom what she wanted. Lorraine." I pressed the stems gently toward her. For a second, she resisted. Then her fingers closed around them. Her hands were cold. I turned toward the guests. "Let's give Mom and Dad the bridal moment they planned." The silence afterward was almost physical. Nobody laughed. Nobody clapped. There was no dramatic gasp from one designated relative. Instead, I watched understanding move through the room in smaller ways. Heads turned toward my mother. One of Nathan's aunts lowered her program. Someone near the center aisle looked from Brittany's white dress to my parents and then back to me. The visual had changed. A woman wearing white at her sister's wedding could be explained as bad judgment. Parents standing proudly beside that woman after suggesting she walk before the bride was much harder to misunderstand. I gestured toward Mom and Dad. "Come on, you should be in the picture too." Mom stared at me. Dad stepped closer and lowered his voice. "This is ridiculous." I kept the microphone away from my mouth for that exchange. "You wanted this." "No, your mother suggested something. You're turning it into a spectacle." I looked around the conservatory. It became a spectacle when Brittany arrived dressed like that. Brittany's face flushed. "Lorraine." I turned back to Mom and raised the microphone. "Mom, you wanted Brittany to walk before me, right?" Mom's smile returned. It was the smile she used when she knew people were watching and needed them to believe everything was under control. I just thought it would be a sweet idea. There it was. A direct answer. Not Brittany surprised us. Not I misunderstood. Not the coordinator changed something. Mom had wanted it. "A sweet idea," I repeated. Then I stepped aside. Then stand with her. For the first time that afternoon, Mom looked embarrassed. She glanced toward the guests, then toward the camera. The videographer had kept recording, not because I had asked him to, but because a wedding photographer or videographer does not normally stop when something unexpected happens in the middle of the ceremony space. Mom had wanted my reaction captured. Instead, she had put herself inside the frame. Dad understood faster. His face hardened. "Lauren, don't make a scene." I looked directly at him. "I'm not. I agreed with you." He had nothing useful to say after that. Mom finally stepped beside Brittany because refusing would have looked even stranger after admitting the idea was hers. Dad joined them reluctantly. For a few seconds, the three of them stood together at the rear entrance while Brittany held my bouquet. I did not need to insult them. I did not need to explain favoritism. I did not need to tell 180 people what my childhood had been like. The picture did the work. My mother had spent years treating Brittany's needs as naturally more urgent than mine. My father had spent years smoothing over the imbalance by telling me I was stronger. Now, for one brief and painfully clear moment, they had made that structure visible, and they had done it themselves. I looked at Brittany. Her expression had changed. The defiance I had seen when she first entered was gone. She looked uncomfortable now. Maybe because the attention no longer felt flattering once everyone understood where it had come from. I held out my hand. She looked at the bouquet. "What?" she whispered. "I'm taking it back." For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Then she handed it to me. Our fingers touched around the stems. I brought the microphone back to my mouth. "Thank you. Now I'd like to get married." That got the first small sound of relief from the room. The coordinator moved immediately. She guided my parents and Brittany back behind the opaque doors, then closed them so the ceremony space disappeared again. The sound technician took the microphone from me. Claire came to my side and adjusted the bouquet because several stems had shifted. Nobody tried to discuss feelings. That was exactly what I needed. The coordinator spoke in the calm voice of someone resetting a schedule after a technical delay. We're going back to the original order. Family entrance first. Wedding party after that. Lauren stays here until her cue. Mom opened her mouth. The coordinator looked directly at her. The processional order is already finalized. Mom closed it. Brittany stood near the wall. Dad adjusted his jacket. I looked at my sister. She had no bouquet now, no place at the front of the processional. Just a white dress she had chosen to wear, and the consequences of having worn it. The coordinator asked me, "Do you need 5 minutes?" I checked my breathing. My hands were still trembling, but less than before. "No, start when you're ready." Mom stared at me, as if my refusal to collapse was somehow unfair. I did not look back. The music began. My parents went through the doors. The wedding party followed according to the schedule Nathan and I had approved weeks earlier. Brittany entered as a guest, not as some improvised second bride. Then the doors closed again. For the first time since she had arrived, I was alone with Claire and the coordinator. Claire whispered, "That was insane." I let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "Yes. You okay?" "I will be." That was enough. The music changed. The doors opened. Nathan was waiting at the other end of the aisle. I watched his face when he saw me. He knew something had happened because the ceremony had been delayed, and half the room looked like they had just survived an argument. But he did not leave the altar or come charging down the aisle to rescue me. He trusted me to reach him. I walked. With every step, the noise in my head quieted. By the time I placed my hand in Nathan's, I was no longer thinking about Brittany's dress. He looked at me carefully. "You okay?" he whispered. "Yes." The officiant smiled at both of us and continued. That answer was not denial. I was angry. I was hurt. But I was exactly where I wanted to be, marrying the person I had chosen, in a ceremony my parents had failed to take away from me. We exchanged vows. Nathan slid the ring onto my finger. When it was my turn, my hand had finally stopped shaking. The guests laughed when Nathan stumbled over one word and started again. I laughed too. That sound mattered to me because it belonged to the wedding Nathan and I had planned, not the one my parents had tried to redirect. By the time we walked back up the aisle as husband and wife, Mom had restored her public face. She hugged relatives. She complimented the flowers. She posed for photographs. If someone had arrived late to the reception, they might never have known anything unusual had happened. Dad waited until after dinner to approach me near the edge of the ballroom. "We'll talk later," he said. I was holding a glass of water and watching Nathan laugh with two friends near the dance floor. "No," I said. "Not tonight." His eyebrows drew together. "You went too far." I looked at him. Brittany wore white to my wedding. Mom tried to put her in the processional before me. "You warned me not to make a scene before I said a word. We were trying to prevent exactly what happened. What happened was I agreed with you." Dad glanced around. "You know that's not what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean. You wanted me quiet enough for the thing to happen, but not calm enough to make everyone look at who caused it." His expression went flat. "You're overthinking this." Maybe I was. At that point, I still did not know how much there was to think about. "I'm not discussing it tonight." I walked away. Brittany found me later, shortly before Nathan and I were preparing to leave. She had been avoiding me most of the reception. "You humiliated me," she said. I stared at her. "You wore white to my wedding." Mom said, "That's not an answer." Brittany looked past me toward the dance floor. Her anger was still there, but something else had started moving underneath it. "I didn't think you'd do that." "Do what?" "Put me up there. You were willing to walk before me." "That's different." "How?" She opened her mouth, then stopped. I waited. Finally, she lowered her voice. "She told me you'd be mad, but she didn't say you'd do that." I looked toward Mom. She was standing across the ballroom speaking to Diane, one hand resting lightly on my aunt's arm. Then I looked back at Brittany. "What exactly did Mom tell you?" Brittany's face changed immediately. "Not here." She walked away before I could stop her. I stood there watching my sister cross the ballroom, white dress moving between tables. And for the first time that day, the question inside me shifted. I had spent hours wondering why Brittany had agreed to wear white. Now I was wondering what my mother had needed Brittany to believe about me before she ever put that dress on. The morning after our wedding, Nathan and I left Columbus before 9. I had slept maybe 4 hours, but for once exhaustion felt clean. The ceremony was over. We were married. Whatever my family wanted to say about the white dress could wait until we got back. That was the plan. I turned off most of my notifications before we boarded our flight. I left calls from Claire, work, and the wedding vendors available in case something actually needed my attention. The family group chat went silent on my phone. So did Brittany. So did Mom and Dad. For the first 24 hours, the absence felt almost generous. Nathan and I talked about the ceremony only once that first day. We were sitting at dinner when he finally asked what had delayed the processional. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting until I reached the part where I put the bouquet in Brittany's hands. Then he leaned back. "You gave her the bouquet?" "I did." "And your parents stood with her?" "For about 10 of the longest seconds of my life." Nathan covered his mouth, but I could see the smile in his eyes. It wasn't funny. It's a little funny. It was humiliating. For them. I looked down at my plate. That was the part I was still trying to understand. I had been angry when Brittany appeared in white. I had been angrier when Mom tried to put her into the processional ahead of me. But by the time I walked down the aisle, something inside me had settled. I had not won anything dramatic. I had simply refused to perform the role they had prepared for me. Nathan reached across the table. "Do you want to deal with it now?" "No." "You sure?" "Yes." The answer surprised me with how certain it felt. A year earlier, I would have been halfway through drafting messages to 3 relatives, 2 family friends, and anyone else who might have heard a distorted version before dessert. That was how I handled problems. Identify the error, correct the record, close the loop. But I had just gotten married. I did not want to spend the first week of my marriage arguing with my mother about a dress she had already admitted was her idea. So I put my phone face down. For the next few days, I actually managed to leave it there most of the time. Then the messages started slipping through. The first came from a cousin I liked but rarely spoke to directly. "Hope you and Brittany work things out. Weddings are stressful." I read it twice. There was nothing openly accusatory about it. That almost made it worse. I typed, "We're fine," then deleted it. I typed, "What did you hear?" and deleted that too. Nathan was beside me reading something on his tablet. "What is it?" I showed him. He read the message. "Do you want to ask?" "I want to know why she thinks Brittany and I need to work something out." "That's not the same question." I looked at him. He put the tablet down. "Do you want information or do you want to defend yourself?" I hated how quickly I knew the answer. "Both." "Then maybe wait until you know what you're defending yourself against." I put the phone down. That was harder than it sounds. When someone misunderstands me, I feel it physically. My brain starts arranging facts before I consciously decide to. I remember timestamps, exact wording, who was standing where, what happened first. It had made me good at my job. It had also made me very easy to pull into endless arguments with people who were less interested in facts than in keeping me engaged. 2 days later, another message arrived. This one came from an older family friend. "Beautiful wedding. I'm glad things settled down in the end." Things. Again. No one named what those things were. I did not answer. On the 4th day of our honeymoon, I made the mistake of opening the family group chat. Mom had posted a photograph from the reception. It was a perfectly normal picture of her and Dad smiling together. Under it, she had written, "We love both our girls more than anything, and hope everyone can move forward with grace and kindness. Families are too precious to hold on to hurt." There were heart reactions beneath it. An aunt had written, "Beautifully said." Someone else wrote, "Amen." I stared at the screen. Nathan was on the balcony of our hotel room, and for a few seconds I considered not showing him because I knew exactly what he would say. Then he came inside. "You opened it. How did you know?" "Your face." I handed him the phone. He read the post. "That's clever." I hated that word because it was correct. Mom had accused me of nothing. She had said no names. She had described no event. But the wording assumed injury, conflict, and forgiveness. Anyone who had seen what happened at the wedding could fill in the blanks however they wanted. And anyone who had not seen it would naturally assume there was some private family story underneath the public scene. "She's making herself the peacemaker," I said. Nathan gave the phone back. "Looks like it." I could answer. "You could." I could write exactly what happened. "You could." I looked at him. "You're being annoying." "I'm trying very hard not to tell you what to do." I sat on the edge of the bed. "If I don't answer, people will believe her." "Some will. That doesn't bother you?" "It bothers me because it bothers you." "That is not useful." He sat beside me. "Okay, useful answer. What result do you want?" "I want people to know what happened." "Which people?" "All of them." "Why?" "Because she's lying." "She's implying." "That's worse." "Maybe. But if you write a 5-paragraph explanation under that post, what happens?" I knew. Mom would reply that she was only trying to heal. Dad would tell me I was dragging private family issues into public. Brittany would say I was embarrassing her again. The conversation would expand until the original event disappeared under arguments about tone. "I look defensive," I said. "You look engaged." I frowned. "That's not better." "No." I read Mom's post again. For years I had mistaken being factual for being impossible to manipulate. But facts only helped if everyone in the conversation cared which version was true. I closed the app. "I'm not spending our honeymoon doing this." Nathan kissed my forehead. "Good." I still thought about it every day. That was the part I did not tell him. By the time we returned to Columbus on June 8th, I had 4 messages from relatives that all carried the same careful tone. Nobody said I had screamed. Nobody said I had thrown Brittany out. Nobody accused me of anything specific enough to disprove. Instead, the wording was softer. I'm sure emotions were high. "I hope you can forgive each other. You know your mom only wanted everyone included." That last one made me stop. It came from my Uncle Paul. I called him. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, newlywed." "Hi. How was the trip?" "Good." "I need to ask you something." There was a pause. "Okay. You said Mom only wanted everyone included." "Included in what?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Loren, I'm not angry. I'm asking." "Well, the wedding." "That doesn't answer the question." He sighed. "I just think you could have handled it privately." I stood at the kitchen counter with one hand resting against the edge. "Handled what?" "You know what." "No, I want you to say it." He hesitated. "The thing with Brittany. She wore white to my wedding." "I know. Mom suggested she walk before me." "I heard." "Then what exactly was I supposed to handle privately?" Paul lowered his voice even though I had no idea where he was. "Your mother said you set Brittany up in front of everyone." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. "I set Brittany up?" She said you made her come forward, handed her the bouquet, and basically embarrassed her in front of the entire room. That happened after Brittany showed up in white. "I know, Lauren. And after Mom said she should walk before me." "I'm not taking sides." "You already are." "I'm trying not to." "Then describe the sequence." He went quiet. That was when I understood the shape of what Mom had done. She had not denied the white dress. She had not denied her own suggestion. She had shifted the center of the story. The offense was no longer what they had done. The offense was how I had responded. "Did Mom tell you why she suggested Brittany walk before me?" I asked. "She said she thought it would be a nice sister moment." "And did she tell you I had agreed with her?" "She said you were being sarcastic." I closed my eyes. Of course she did. Anything I said could be translated after the fact. Calm became sarcasm. Boundaries became punishment. Silence became coldness. Anger became instability. There was no safe emotional position if Mom remained, the person explaining what my behavior meant. "I need to go," I said. "Lauren, I really don't want to be involved." "Then don't repeat her version to me." I ended the call before he could answer. Nathan was in the living room unpacking. He looked over. "That went well. Apparently I set Brittany up." He stopped. "What?" I told him. By the time I finished, the anger I had suppressed during the honeymoon was back, but it was different now. Less explosive. More focused. I opened my laptop. Nathan watched me. "What are you doing?" checking the videographer contract. He did not stop me. The contract had specified delivery of ceremony raw footage through a secure cloud link within roughly 8 to 10 business days after the wedding, with the edited film coming much later. The link arrived the next morning. That timing mattered to me because I did not want the footage to become some magical piece of evidence that appeared because I needed it. Nathan and I had paid for the raw ceremony files from the beginning. I would have received them whether my family behaved badly or not. I downloaded the files after breakfast. Then I waited almost an hour before opening them. Nathan was working from home that morning. He asked if I wanted company. No. You sure? Yes. I needed to see it alone first. The footage began before the processional. I skipped through the routine setup until I reached the rear entrance. There I was. Wedding dress. Bouquet. Hair pinned exactly the way I remembered. Then Brittany appeared. White dress. Mom beside her. I turned up the volume. She should walk before you, Mom said. It'll be beautiful. My own face was visible in profile. I watched myself stare at her. Dad moved into frame. Lauren, don't make a scene. I paused the video. For several seconds, I did nothing. That line had bothered me from the moment he said it. Watching it from the outside made the timing impossible to ignore. He warned me before I had raised my voice. Before I had taken a step. Before I had said anything at all. I pressed play. Mom said, "It's a dress, Lauren. Please don't turn this into something it isn't." Again, before I had done anything. Then I watched myself look toward the ceremony entrance. Open the doors. Take the microphone. Invite Brittany forward. I had remembered being calm. The footage showed I had been calmer than I felt. My voice did not shake. I did not curse. I did not insult Brittany. I did not touch her except when I placed the bouquet in her hands. Then came the moment I had been dreading. Let's give Mom and Dad the bridal moment they planned. On video, the silence afterward was even longer than I remembered. Mom walked into frame. Dad followed. I asked, "Mom, you wanted Brittany to walk before me, right?" Mom smiled. "I just thought it would be a sweet idea." I paused again. There it was. Not interpretation. Not memory. Her own voice. Her own face. Her own admission. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sick. Because I was staring at undeniable evidence of something and still knew there were people who had already been taught to see it differently. I kept watching. When Brittany handed the bouquet back, I froze the frame. Her fingers were still wrapped around the stems. Mom stood behind her. Dad's body was angled away. I looked at my sister's face. She looked embarrassed. Not devastated. Not attacked. Embarrassed. I stared at that frame longer than I should have. Nathan eventually came into the office. He stood behind my chair. "You okay?" I'm looking at myself being completely calm. I can see that. And somehow I'm the unstable one. Who called you unstable? Not directly. That matters. I turned toward him. "You think I'm overreacting?" "No, I think you need to be precise." I leaned back. He pointed at the paused footage. "This proves what happened in that room." "Yes, it does not prove why your mother wanted it to happen." "I know. It also doesn't prove what she told everyone afterward unless somebody gives you the actual words." I hated that he was right. I wanted the footage to answer everything. It did not. It proved sequence. It proved tone. It proved Dad had warned me before I reacted. It proved Mom had admitted the idea was hers. But it did not prove motive. And if I posted it everywhere with a caption accusing Mom of setting me up, I would be making a claim larger than the evidence I had. I closed the video. "I still want to send it to the group chat." Nathan nodded. "I know. I want to post the whole thing and say, 'Here, watch it yourself.'" "You could." I stared at him. "You're really committed to not being useful." He smiled. "I learned from your family." That made me laugh despite myself. Then he became serious. "You can correct a lie if someone tells one. But you don't have to send evidence to every person who looks at you strangely. That feels passive. Does it?" "Yes. Or maybe you're just not used to letting people be wrong." That one landed. I looked back at the frozen frame. I hate being misrepresented. I know. I could fix this. Some of it. All of it. No. I looked at him. Nathan leaned against the desk. You can show people what happened. You cannot make them care more about what happened than about whichever version is emotionally easier for them. I knew that. I hated knowing it. So what am I supposed to do? Decide what actually needs correcting. I reopened the footage. A week earlier, my instinct would have been to create a folder, draft a statement, and send everything. Instead, I made a rule. If someone made a specific false claim about what I had done, I would correct it. If necessary, I would use the footage. But I would not send the video to the entire family simply to force everyone to agree with me. It was a small boundary. It felt much harder than the financial one. Because money was visible, reputation was not. I closed the laptop and went downstairs. That afternoon, Mom posted another message in the family chat. Life is too short for grudges. We're choosing love. I did not answer. An hour later, Diane texted me directly. My aunt was Mom's older sister, and unlike Paul, she rarely inserted herself into family disputes. Her message said, "Are you home?" I wrote, "Yes." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally she sent, "There's something your mother sent me the night before the wedding." I didn't think much of it then. I do now. My stomach tightened. What did she send? Diane replied, "An email." I'm forwarding the original chain so you can see the date and exactly what she wrote. I opened my inbox. The message arrived less than a minute later. The original email had been sent at 9:43 on Friday night, May 29th. The night before my wedding, Mom had written, "Just a heads up about tomorrow. Lauren has been unusually sensitive where Brittany is concerned. If she gets upset, please don't take sides or encourage her. Craig and I are trying to handle this privately. I'm hoping everyone can stay calm and help us keep the day peaceful." I read it once, then again. The raw footage was still open on my laptop upstairs. I could see the sequence in my mind. Brittany entering in white, Mom proposing, she walked before me, Dad warning me not to make a scene. All of that had happened the next afternoon. But this email existed before any of it. Before Brittany walked through those doors. Before I touched a microphone. Before I said a single word. My mother had not predicted my reaction. She had prepared an audience for it. The email did not prove that my mother had planned every detail of what happened at my wedding. I need to make that clear, because at the time I was angry enough to want it to prove exactly that. I wanted one clean piece of evidence that explained the white dress, my father's warnings, Brittany's behavior, and every strange conversation that had happened in the weeks before the ceremony. What I actually had was narrower, and, in some ways, more disturbing. Before anything happened, Mom had already told at least one person to expect me to become emotional around Brittany. She had given Diane a lens through which to watch me before there was anything to watch. I met Diane 2 days after she forwarded the email. She lived on the opposite side of the Columbus metro area, so we chose a coffee shop roughly halfway between us. It took me a little over half an hour to get there. I arrived early, mostly because sitting at home staring at screenshots had started making me feel like I was trying to solve a problem from inside the problem itself. Diane came in carrying a large purse and her laptop under one arm. She looked uncomfortable before she even sat down. "I brought the original," she said. "I believe you." "I know, I just thought you should see it in my inbox." She opened her laptop anyway. The email was there exactly as she had forwarded it to me. Friday night. 9:43. Mom's account. Diane's address. Nothing cropped, nothing retyped, nothing reconstructed from memory. Just a short message from my mother telling her sister that I had been unusually sensitive where Brittany was concerned and asking her not to take sides if I got upset the next day. I read it again. Diane watched me. I should have asked what she meant. I looked up. "Why didn't you?" She rubbed her thumb along the edge of her coffee cup, because it sounded familiar. That answer interested me more than an apology would have. What sounded familiar? The way Nancy talks about you when you two are having problems. He sat back. Diane looked embarrassed. She'll say you're stressed. Or overwhelmed. Or that you've become very rigid about something. She doesn't usually say you're wrong exactly. She makes it sound like there's a reason you're not seeing things clearly. The description was so precise that I felt a small chill move through me. What did you think when she sent the email? Diane took her time answering. I thought you and Brittany had been arguing. We hadn't. I know that now. Did Mom say we had? Not directly. That mattered. I leaned forward. What did she say? Diane looked down at the email. She said you'd been pulling away from the family. She said you were making things about money lately. She said Brittany was taking it personally and she was worried everything was going to spill over into the wedding. I stopped her. Making what about money? She didn't give me specifics. Did she mention the dress? No. Did she say Brittany was going to walk before me? No. Did she say she expected something specific to happen? Diane shook her head. No, Lauren, if she had written, Brittany is going to wear white, and I think Lauren will lose it, I would have called you. I believed her. That did not make me feel much better. So when you saw Brittany in white? Diane's eyes moved away from mine. I thought, here we go. The words landed hard. Not because Diane sounded cruel. She sounded ashamed. You thought I was going to make a scene. I thought there had already been some conflict I didn't know about. Because Mom told you there was. Yes. And when I took the microphone? Diane looked down. I thought you were proving her right. There it was. My mother's email had worked. Not by inventing a specific lie. By creating an expectation. Once Diane expected me to become emotional, everything I did could be interpreted through that expectation. If I had yelled, Mom was right. If I had thrown Brittany out, Mom was right. Even when I stayed calm and took the microphone, Diane initially saw the action as escalation because she had already been told to expect escalation. What changed your mind? I asked. The sequence. I waited. Diane looked back at me. At first, I remembered the big moment. You giving Brittany the bouquet. Everybody looking at your parents. That's what stuck with me. Then afterward, your mother kept saying you deliberately embarrassed Brittany, and I started thinking about what happened before that. She suggested Brittany walk before me. Yes. And Dad warned me before I reacted. Yes. And she had emailed you before any of it. Yes. Diane's face tightened. I realized I had been watching you through a story she told me the night before. For once, I did not feel the need to reassure her. Diane was not the villain in what happened, but she was an adult who had accepted someone else's interpretation of me without checking. Her discomfort belonged to her. Did Mom send anything like that to anyone else? I don't know. Did she ask you to talk to anyone? No. Did Dad contact you? No. I nodded. Those answers were important too. The temptation was to take one email and turn it into a conspiracy involving half the family. I did not have evidence for that. What I knew was simple. Mom had pre-framed me to Diane. What I suspected was that she had done something similar with other people. What I did not yet know was whether the white dress had already been planned when she wrote the email. That distinction frustrated me, but I forced myself to keep it. I had spent enough time being accused of turning feelings into facts. I was not going to do the same thing just because anger made the conclusion attractive. Diane took a sip of coffee. There was something else. I looked at her. Not about the wedding exactly. She said you'd become controlling about money. The phrase hit me with such familiarity that for a second I was no longer sitting in a coffee shop in June. I was standing in my parents' kitchen 2 Christmases earlier, with snowmelt darkening the mat by the back door, and Brittany staring at me as if I had personally canceled the holiday. She had called me 3 days before Christmas and asked to borrow $2,800. Not for rent. Not for a medical emergency. She had put a deposit on a new apartment and underestimated the combined cost of moving, furniture, and the remaining balance on her old lease. I had already lent her money earlier that year. She had repaid some of it, not all. So I said no. I remember how ordinary the conversation had started. I can send you $500 if you're short on groceries or utilities, I told her. But I'm not covering the apartment gap. Brittany became quiet. You have the money. That isn't the question. It kind of is. No. The question is whether this is my expense. She accused me of making her feel irresponsible. I told her I thought signing a lease without calculating the overlap had been irresponsible. That was probably not the gentlest sentence I could have chosen. It was also true. We ended the call irritated with each other. 3 days later, at Christmas dinner, my cousin asked if everything was okay between Brittany and me. I said yes. She looked surprised. Later, I found out Mom had told 2 relatives that I had become very controlling about money, and that Brittany was struggling with how judgmental I had become since getting promoted at work. At the time, I confronted Mom. She denied using the word judgmental. Then she said, I was explaining why Brittany was upset. I told her Brittany could explain her own feelings. Mom answered, not everybody communicates like you do. And somehow, within 5 minutes, the conversation became about my tone. I had forgotten most of that by the following spring. Not because it did not matter. Because there was always another thing. Another birthday. Another bill. Another family dinner. Another disagreement that got folded back into normal life before anyone examined what had actually happened. Sitting across from Diane, I finally saw the structure underneath the incidents. When I said no to Brittany, Mom did not describe the boundary. She described my personality. Controlling. When I stopped handling expenses, I was making things about money. When I resisted something at the wedding, I would be sensitive. The action changed. The translation stayed the same. My boundary became evidence of a defect in me. I left the coffee shop with more questions than answers, but at least I knew what kind of questions to ask. I did not go home and build a case against my family. I went home and checked my own memory. That difference mattered. I opened my bank records because the word money had begun appearing too often around conversations that supposedly had nothing to do with money. I did not know what I expected to find. Probably less than what was there. The first transfer I recognized was from 9 years earlier. Dad had needed help covering part of an unexpected home repair after another expense hit the same month. I remembered sending the money because he had sounded embarrassed, asking. A year later, there was another transfer connected to a car repair. Then a medical deductible for Mom that she repaid in pieces over several months. Then Brittany's first apartment problem. Then another payment I had made directly to a contractor because Dad's card had been declined after a fraud alert. None of the amounts, individually, shocked me. That was the point. There was no giant secret account draining my salary. There was no dramatic theft. There were simply dozens of moments where the fastest solution had been Lauren. I pulled old emails next. Can you look at this insurance statement? Do you understand what they're asking for? Can you call the contractor? They listen to you. Can you cover this until Friday? Can you help Brittany figure this out? One-time emergency. Temporary problem. Just this once. Those phrases appeared often enough that eventually I stopped reading the messages and started making a basic timeline. Not a bill. Not a demand for repayment. Just dates, amounts I had actually paid, and what they had been for. I did not put a dollar value on the hours. That would have been dishonest. My time mattered, but I was not going to pretend every phone call I voluntarily made created a debt my parents owed me. The cash was easier to measure. By the time I stopped, the total was higher than I had expected, but not unbelievable. Spread across roughly 9 years. It was the kind of number that could hide inside a middle-class family precisely because no single request seemed catastrophic. The pattern mattered more than the total. Every time the system developed pressure, I had relieved it. Then 6 weeks before the wedding, I had said I was done doing that automatically. And shortly afterward, my mother had started telling people I was pulling away. I sat at my desk and stared at the timeline. Nathan came in carrying 2 glasses of water. How bad? Not bad. He handed me one. That tone means something. It's not the amount. He looked at the screen. I had labeled each line with the year and reason. He read silently for a few seconds. I thought there'd be more, he said. So did I. That's good. It is. He waited. I said, it also means this wasn't about them being financially dependent on me in some dramatic way. No, they could survive without me. Yes, that realization was important. I did not want to rewrite my own life into a story where my parents would have been homeless without me. They would not. They had income. They had a house. They had savings. They had also become accustomed to the fact that when their budget tightened or a complicated problem appeared, I often absorbed part of the impact. Losing that would be inconvenient. It would require choices. It would remove a cushion. But it was not the same as losing their entire livelihood. Nathan pointed toward the timeline. What does this tell you? That Mom started talking about money after I stopped being useful in that way. That's one interpretation. I gave him a look. He smiled. You told me to keep you honest. I did not. You married me. Same thing. I looked back at the screen. The evidence still did not tell me what Mom had planned for the wedding. So I called Dad. He answered almost immediately. Hey. Hi. I need to ask you something directly. His tone changed. What? Did you know Brittany was wearing white before she arrived at the ceremony? There was a pause. Not long. Long enough. I knew she had a light-colored dress. What color did you think it was? I don't know, Lauren. Ivory, cream, something like that. Did you see it? Not properly. What does that mean? He sighed. It means I knew your mother and Brittany had been talking about what she was wearing. I wasn't involved in every detail. I wrote down the wording while he spoke. Not because I wanted to trap him. Because I knew how quickly conversations with Dad became approximate afterward. Why did you tell me not to make a scene before I said anything? Another pause. Because I know you. The answer hurt more than I expected. What does that mean? It means I knew you were going to be upset. Why? Because your sister showed up in a dress you weren't going to like. That isn't what you said. What? You didn't say, I understand you're upset. You told me not to make a scene before I reacted. Lauren, you're parsing words. Yes, exactly. This is what you do. You take every sentence apart until it means something sinister. I pressed my fingers against my forehead. Mom emailed Diane the night before the wedding and warned her I might get upset about Brittany. Silence. This pause was longer. Finally, Dad said, your mother was trying to keep everyone calm. Calm about what? You'd been tense. With Brittany? With the family. That's not what the email says. Then ask your mother. I'm asking you. Why? Because you were standing beside her. His voice hardened. I'm not doing this. Doing what? Letting you put us on trial over a wedding misunderstanding. I nearly laughed. A misunderstanding usually involves two people understanding the same event differently. Mom admitted she wanted Brittany to walk before me. She thought it would be nice. And you knew enough to predict I'd object. I know my daughter. There it was again. He said it like intimacy. It did not feel like intimacy anymore. It felt like a verdict. Because I know you. He did not have to listen to what I actually said or did. He could respond to the Lauren he believed existed underneath it all. Sensitive. Rigid. Judgmental. Likely to make a scene. Did you know she was wearing white? I asked again. I already answered. No. You answered that you knew it was light-colored. That is my answer. Okay. He sounded surprised by how quickly I stopped. That's it? For now. Lauren, your mother is devastated by what you're doing. What am I doing? Dragging this out. I looked at the timeline on my desk. I asked you a question. You're making this family into a case file. No. I'm trying to stop being the only person who has to accept everybody else's version of what happened. He did not answer. I ended the call. For several minutes, I sat there feeling something I had not expected. Not rage. Disappointment. Mom had always been easier to identify when she was manipulating a conversation. Dad had been harder because he wrapped his part in calmness. For years, I had told myself he understood me even when he disagreed. But because I know you was not understanding. It was permission to stop being curious about me. I looked at my phone. There was one other person I needed to ask. I texted Brittany. Who told you I'd be angry about the dress? She did not answer. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I started making dinner because I refused to sit staring at a phone waiting for someone else to decide whether I deserved information. Almost an hour later, the screen lit up. Brittany wrote, Mom said you'd get over it. I wiped my hands and typed back. That's not what I asked. 3 dots appeared. I wrote, What exactly did she tell you before the wedding? The dots vanished, then returned. Brittany finally answered. This is not a text conversation. I stared at the message. Why? Another pause. We need to talk in person. I felt my stomach tighten. I typed, About Mom? Brittany answered almost immediately this time. About both of them. Then another message appeared. There's something Dad said before the ceremony that I didn't think mattered then. Brittany and I met the next evening at a small restaurant in Dublin, far enough from my parents' neighborhood that neither of us was likely to run into someone we knew. She had suggested coffee first, then changed it to dinner because, in her words, this might take longer than coffee. That did not make me feel better. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a booth along the wall, where I could see the entrance without sitting in the middle of the room. Old habits. Give me uncertainty, and I start organizing the environment. Brittany walked in wearing jeans, a cream sweater, and no makeup except mascara. She looked tired, not devastated, not fragile, just like someone who had spent several nights replaying conversations she no longer trusted. She slid into the booth across from me, set her phone beside her water glass, and looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You're still mad?" "Yes." "At me?" "Yes." She nodded once. "Okay." That answer disarmed me more than an excuse would have. I had expected some version of Mom made me do it. I had spent most of the afternoon preparing myself not to let Brittany erase her own responsibility simply because our parents might have manipulated parts of the situation. She picked up the menu, then put it down without opening it. "I knew you wouldn't like the dress." Good place to start. I knew wearing white was wrong. I waited. She looked at me directly. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't." That mattered. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders, although not enough to call it relief. "Then why did you wear it?" Brittany rubbed her thumb against the edge of her phone case. "Because Mom made it sound like you were turning everything into rules. The wedding, money, who could do what, where everybody could stand. She kept saying you were getting controlling." I almost laughed. There it is again. "What?" "Controlling." Brittany frowned. I told her what Diane had said about Mom describing me that way after I stopped lending money and again before the wedding. Brittany's face changed. "She told Diane that?" "Yes." "When?" "The night before the wedding." Brittany looked down. "What exactly did she say?" I pulled up the forwarded email and slid my phone across the table. She read it silently. Her eyes moved back to the beginning. Then she read it again. "She didn't tell me she emailed Diane. Why would she?" Brittany pushed the phone back. "I thought she was trying to calm everybody down." So did Diane. The server came over, and we ordered mostly because neither of us wanted to have this conversation with a stranger standing beside the table. When he left, Brittany reached for her water. "Mom started talking about your wedding differently after that dinner at their house. The money conversation." "Yeah." "What did she say?" "At first, just that you were changing." I leaned back. "That sounds like her. She said you were acting like you were starting a new family and didn't need the old one anymore." "That is not what I said." "I know that now." "You were at dinner." "I know." "Then you knew it then." Brittany looked irritated. "I heard what you said, Lauren. I also heard Mom talking about it for 6 weeks afterward." The defensive tone made me want to push harder, but I stopped myself. That was how our conversations usually went. One of us said something imperfectly. The other attacked the imperfection. Within minutes, we were fighting about tone instead of information. "What did she say?" I asked again. Brittany took a breath. "She said Nathan was encouraging you to cut everyone off." "He wasn't." "I know." "She told Dad that too?" "Yes." "Did Dad believe her?" "I don't know." "That's not true." Brittany's eyes narrowed. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Decide I know more than I'm saying." "Do you?" "Sometimes." Despite myself, I smiled. Brittany almost did too. Then she looked down again. "Dad didn't argue with her." That sounded more believable. "What about the dress?" She hesitated. "I bought the green one first." "I know. I was going to wear it." "Then what changed?" "Mom came shopping with me about 2 weeks before the wedding because I wanted different shoes. We went into another store. I tried on the white dress." "Why?" "Because I liked it." I stared at her. She threw up one hand. "I know how that sounds. It sounds exactly like what happened. I wasn't shopping for your wedding dress. I tried it on because I liked the cut. And then, Mom said it looked amazing." "I'm sure she did. She said the whole white at a wedding thing was outdated." "Of course she did." Brittany looked annoyed. "Can you let me finish?" I nodded. "She said you'd probably make a comment, but that you'd get over it." That matched the text Brittany had sent me. And you believed her? Yes. Why? Because I thought you would be mad for 5 minutes and then decide you were above caring. The honesty of that hurt more than I expected. Above caring. You know what I mean. No, explain it. Brittany looked toward the window. You've always acted like you don't need the same things everybody else does. That silenced me. I wanted to reject it. Then I remembered my graduation dinner. Christmas. Every family argument where I had left before anyone saw how badly I was hurt. Maybe my parents had not invented that impression entirely. They had used it, but I had helped build it. I care, I said. I know that now. You knew it then too. Brittany shook her head. No. I knew you'd be angry because it was your wedding. I didn't understand how much history you were seeing when I walked in. I held her gaze. That doesn't make what you did okay. I didn't say it did. Good. I liked the attention. There it was. No excuse. No mother to hide behind. Brittany continued before I could respond. I liked that Mom thought I looked beautiful. I liked that Dad didn't tell me to change. And if I'm being completely honest, part of me liked the idea that you couldn't dictate everything. I stared at her. Everything? The wedding. My wedding. I know. You weren't a bridesmaid because you said you didn't want the responsibility. I know. You chose your own dress. I know. Nobody was dictating your life. I know that now. I felt anger rise again. You keep saying that now, because I was wrong then. She did not raise her voice. That stopped me more effectively than if she had fought. Brittany looked down at the table. I had spent weeks hearing that you were treating everyone like problems to manage. Then I heard you say you weren't helping with money anymore. Mom kept talking about Nathan changing you. Dad kept saying he hoped you didn't let wedding stress get to you. By the time Mom told me to wear the white dress, it felt like some stupid little rebellion against you. Against me for what? She gave a helpless shrug. That's the part I can't explain anymore. Our food arrived. Neither of us touched it for several minutes. Finally I asked, Did Mom tell you I had approved the dress? No. That was important. Did she tell you I wouldn't care? She said you'd get over it. Not the same thing. I know. Did she tell you she was going to suggest you walk before me? Brittany's fork stopped. No. You didn't know? No. I watched her carefully. When did you know? When she said it. At the venue? Yes. Why didn't you refuse? Brittany's mouth tightened. Because I was embarrassed. That doesn't make sense. I know. No, really. If you were embarrassed, why walk forward? She pushed her plate away slightly. Because everyone was already looking. And Mom told me it would be fine. You're 33. I know how old I am. Then why did Mom telling you it would be fine matter? Brittany stared at me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she said something I had never heard her admit before. Because I'm used to believing her when she tells me what something means. The sentence settled between us. I thought of Diane. She had watched me through the story Mom gave her. Now Brittany was saying she had done the same thing from the other side. What did Mom tell you it meant? I asked. That you were trying to control who got attention. I almost laughed. At my wedding. I know. Do you hear yourself? Yes. Now. Yes, Lauren, now. Her voice sharpened. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm telling you what I thought. I looked down at my food. She was right. Understanding why Brittany did something was not the same as absolving her. I had spent weeks wanting people to make that distinction for me. Mom explaining my behavior was not the same as knowing my motive. If I wanted the truth from Brittany, I had to let her give me an ugly truth without immediately turning it into a verdict. So you walked forward, I said. Yes. And then I gave you the bouquet. Her face flushed. That was awful. For you? Yes. Imagine that. She gave me a look. I deserved some of it. Some? Okay. Most. I almost smiled again. Then she became serious. But that was when I realized Mom hadn't told me everything. What happened? You said, let's give Mom and Dad the bridal moment they planned. I remember. I looked at Mom. I saw. She looked scared. That surprised me. Mom? Yes. I thought she looked angry. She looked angry after. For 1 second, before she covered it, she looked scared. Of what? I didn't know. Brittany picked up her phone. That's why I started going back through messages. My attention shifted immediately. What messages? Mostly texts with Mom, some with Dad. She unlocked the phone. Before I show you this, I need you to understand something. What? I'm not giving you this so you can destroy them. I'm not trying to destroy anyone. I know. But you get very... She searched for the word. Efficient. I stared at her. Are you calling me dangerous because I organize evidence? I'm saying once you decide something is a problem, you don't stop halfway. That is generally how solving problems works. That is exactly what I mean. I could not argue with that. So what are you asking? I'm asking you not to decide what all of this means before you read it. That was fair. Okay. She opened a text thread with Dad. The messages were from the morning of the wedding. Brittany had sent him a mirror photo at 11:14. There was no ambiguity about the dress. White fabric, bare shoulders, wedding-level formality. Her message said, Mom says this is fine. I'm starting to think Lauren's going to kill me. Dad had replied 4 minutes later. You look beautiful. Don't change now. We don't need another issue today. I read it twice, then looked at Brittany. He saw the dress. Yes. He knew it was white. Yes. She scrolled. A little later, Brittany had written, I feel weird about this. Dad replied, Your mother has handled it. Just get here on time. I felt my stomach tighten. What did he mean by Mom handled it? I don't know. Did you ask? No. Why not? Because at the time I thought he meant Mom had talked to you. My skin went cold. You thought Mom had talked to me? Yes. Did she tell you that? Not exactly. I closed my eyes. Of course. Not exactly. That phrase was becoming the architecture of my family. Nobody said the thing directly. They allowed someone else to infer it. Then later they could say, I never told you that. What exactly did Mom say? Brittany opened her thread with Mom. There were dozens of messages from the weeks before the wedding. She scrolled to the day before. One read, Wear what makes you feel confident. Lauren has enough to think about tomorrow. Another, Do not let her mood dictate your day. I kept reading. Then I saw one from Saturday morning. If Lauren reacts, don't argue. Stay calm. She'll settle down once the ceremony starts. I looked at Brittany. That doesn't say she talked to me. I know. But you assumed she had. Yes. Why? Because why else would she be so sure what you were going to do? I had an answer now. Because Mom had already decided what I was going to do. But I still did not know why. Brittany took the phone back. There's more. She opened another message from Dad. Timestamp, 3:40, 2 in the afternoon. Minutes before Brittany entered the staging foyer. Dad wrote, Whatever happens, don't apologize right now. If Lauren gets angry, let her. We need to get everyone through the ceremony. I stopped breathing for a second. Dad wrote that? You can see his name. I know. My voice sounded flatter than I expected. He told you not to apologize. Yes. Before I even saw you. Yes. Why? I don't know. I looked at the message again. If Lauren gets angry, let her. Not calm her down. Not step away. Not change clothes. Let her. The wording bothered me in a way I could not immediately explain. Brittany must have seen something in my face. That's what I meant yesterday when I said Dad said something I didn't think mattered then. What did you think it meant? That he wanted to avoid a bigger fight before the ceremony. And now? Now I think he expected one. I stared at the screen. That matched the footage. Dad approaching me before I spoke. Don't make a scene. But the message added something I had not known. He had also prepared Brittany for my anger. Both sides had been positioned around a reaction that had not happened yet. What did you say back? Brittany scrolled. Her reply had been, Okay. One word. She looked ashamed. I didn't ask questions. No. I should have. Yes. I know. There was nothing useful in punishing her further at that moment. She had already given me something more valuable than an apology. She had given me a source. I took out my own phone. Can you send me screenshots? Brittany did not answer immediately. I waited. Finally, she said, Yes. Original screenshots. Dates visible. Of course. And keep the messages on your phone. She gave me a tired smile. There she is. What? Operations Lauren. She's useful. She is. I almost said, apparently that was the problem. I stopped myself. I still did not know enough. Brittany sent the screenshots. My phone vibrated several times. I checked each one. Dad had seen the dress. Dad had told her not to change. Dad had told her not to apologize. Mom had told her not to let my mood dictate the day. Those were facts. They did not prove my parents had planned every step. They did prove that when Brittany began having doubts, neither parent encouraged the easiest solution. Change the dress. Instead, both encouraged her to continue. Why did Mom want you to walk before me? I asked. Brittany shook her head. I swear I didn't know about that. Did she mention wanting you included in the processional earlier? No. She asked at rehearsal if you could walk closer to the family entrance. I thought she was being Mom. So did I. Brittany looked around the restaurant, then lowered her voice. There's another thing. I waited. She talked about you a lot before the wedding. What kind of talking? She kept asking if I thought you'd changed. What did you say? At first, yes. I laughed without humor. Of course. Loren. Keep going. She asked if Nathan made you more distant. She asked if I thought you were angry at the family. She asked if I felt like you looked down on me. Did you? Sometimes. The answer hurt. But I respected it. Why? Because you can be condescending. I sat back. Okay. You asked. I did. You're smarter than me about a lot of practical things. You know it. Sometimes you walk into a problem and take over so fast that everybody else feels stupid. I wanted to defend myself. Then I remembered Nathan, saying I solved preventable problems before anyone else had to face the consequence. Maybe overfunctioning did not only make people dependent, maybe it also made them resentful. That's fair, I said. Brittany looked surprised. Don't get used to it. She smiled briefly. Then I said, but there's a difference between me being condescending sometimes and me secretly hating you. I know. Did Mom make those things sound like the same thing? Brittany looked down. Yes. That was the first moment I understood how the two of us had been positioned against each other without either of us noticing the mechanism. Mom did not need to invent complete lies. She took real flaws and expanded them until they explained everything. I could be controlling. Therefore, my boundaries were control. I could be impatient with Brittany. Therefore, I resented her happiness. Brittany could be irresponsible. Therefore, she needed protection from criticism. She liked attention. Therefore, every demand for accountability was jealousy. Real weaknesses made better weapons than fabricated ones. You said Mom told you I'd get over the dress, I said. Yes. Did she tell you why? She said you were more worried about appearances than feelings. I laughed once. That's almost impressive. I know. No, really. If I object to the dress, I care too much about appearances. If I don't object, the dress stays. Brittany nodded slowly. I didn't see it like that. Neither did I. That admission surprised both of us. For years, I had thought Mom simply favored Brittany. That was true. But favoritism alone did not explain why every conflict became a story about my personality. It did not explain why she needed Diane prepared before the wedding. It did not explain why Dad told Brittany to let me get angry. What do you think they wanted? Brittany asked. I don't know. You have a theory. I have several. Tell me. No. She frowned. Why? Because you just asked me not to decide what the evidence means before I read it. That was annoying of me. It was also correct. I picked up my water. I know they expected me to react. I know Mom prepared Diane to interpret that reaction a certain way. I know Dad saw your dress and told you not to change. I know both of them discouraged you from apologizing or backing down. I don't know yet what they wanted after that. Brittany went quiet. Then she said, I might. I looked at her. What? She opened her phone again. The morning after the wedding, Mom sent me something. What? I didn't think it was strange then. That sentence is starting to concern me. She ignored that and scrolled through her messages. I was upset because of what you did with the bouquet. Mom kept telling me you'd deliberately humiliated me. She told everyone that. I know. She also told Paul I set you up. Brittany looked disgusted. That's ridiculous. You were willing to walk before me. I know. so I'm still unclear who set whom up. She gave me a tired look. Can we not start fighting again? Fine. She found the message. This. She handed me the phone. It was from Mom, Sunday morning, less than 24 hours after the wedding. I'm sorry your sister chose to handle things the way she did. Give her space during the honeymoon. When she gets back, your father and I are going to have a serious family conversation. This can't keep going. I read it. What can't keep going? I asked. Brittany scrolled to her reply. What do you mean? Mom had answered. The anger, the distance, the way she's using money and boundaries to punish everyone. We need the family united before this gets worse. I stopped. Money. Again. Brittany watched me. What? I read the message a second time. The wedding had been less than a day earlier. According to Mom's public version, the problem was that I had humiliated Brittany over a dress. Yet, in a private message to Brittany, Mom had already connected the wedding to money and boundaries. The boundaries I had announced 6 weeks before Brittany wore white. The timeline shifted into place. Not completely, but enough to make the next question unavoidable. Did Mom tell you who she wanted at this family conversation? Brittany nodded. Her, Dad, me, Diane, Uncle Paul, you, and Nathan. Did she already ask them? I don't know. Did she give you a date? She mentioned next Sunday. I looked at the message again. Brittany leaned toward me. Lauren, what does this have to do with the money? I did not answer immediately, because for the first time, I was beginning to suspect the white dress had never been the real problem. The dress might only have been the easiest way to make my parents' preferred explanation for everything else look true. The message from Mom about the serious family conversation changed the problem for me because it connected 3 things she had been careful to discuss separately with different people. The wedding, my boundaries, money. Brittany had assumed the meeting was about the bouquet and the embarrassment at the ceremony. Diane had assumed Mom was worried about tension between sisters. Uncle Paul had been told I had deliberately humiliated Brittany. Dad kept insisting the white dress was a misunderstanding that I was dragging out. But in Mom's private message to Brittany, written the morning after the wedding, she had called the problem the anger, the distance, the way she's using money and boundaries to punish everyone. That sentence bothered me for a very specific reason. I had announced the financial boundary 6 weeks before the wedding. Nobody could honestly claim I created it because Brittany wore white. The order was wrong. I drove home from dinner with Brittany without calling Mom. That took more restraint than I want to admit. Every instinct I had told me to confront the contradiction immediately. Ask what she meant. Force her to explain why a decision I made in April had somehow become retaliation for something that happened at the end of May. But Nathan had been right about something I was only beginning to learn. If I asked too early, Mom would give me an explanation before I had enough information to test it. So I went home and opened my laptop. Nathan was at the dining table finishing some work when I came in. How bad? He asked. Dad saw the dress before the wedding. He stopped typing. I set my bag down and showed him the screenshots Brittany had sent me. He read Dad's first message. You look beautiful. Don't change now. We don't need another issue today. Then the second. Whatever happens, don't apologize right now. If Lauren gets angry, let her. We need to get everyone through the ceremony. Nathan leaned back. That's not him being surprised. No. He knew. He knew what she was wearing. That's all the text proves. Nathan looked at me. You really are going to make yourself say that every time, aren't you? Yes. Good. I sat across from him. There's more. I showed him Mom's message about the post-wedding family conversation. He read it once. Then again. His expression changed when he reached the line about money. There it is. That's what I thought. What do you think it means? I think they've been trying to connect things that happened in the wrong order. Nathan waited. I opened the family text thread from 6 weeks before the wedding and placed my phone beside Brittany's screenshots. April 18th, I said. I tell them I'm not fronting routine expenses anymore, and I'm not automatically handling paperwork. Nathan nodded. I opened Diane's forwarded email. May 29th. Mom tells Diane I've been unusually sensitive where Brittany is concerned and warns her not to encourage me if I get upset. Then Dad's messages. May 30th morning. Dad sees the white dress and tells Brittany not to change. Later, he tells her not to apologize if I get angry. Then the wedding footage. Same afternoon, Mom suggests Brittany walk before me. Dad warns me not to make a scene before I say anything. Then Mom's message to Brittany, May 31st. Mom says my anger, distance, money, and boundaries are all one problem. Nathan looked at the dates. You don't need a theory to see that sequence. No. What you need is to know what they were saying before the wedding. Exactly. I opened my old messages again. There was something Brittany had said at dinner that I could not stop thinking about. Mom started talking about your wedding differently after that dinner. I searched Mom's name and began reading backward from the wedding date. Most of the messages were ordinary. What time is the rehearsal? Do you want me to bring anything? Your father thinks Navy will photograph better. Then I reached early May. Mom had sent me a long message after I refused to handle another issue involving Dad's contractor. Your father is trying to deal with it himself because he knows how you feel now. I hope you realize how uncomfortable this new arrangement is making everyone. I had answered. He is capable of calling the contractor. I sent him the contact information. Mom replied. This isn't about capability. Family shouldn't have to calculate whether asking for help is allowed. At the time, I had read it as guilt. Now I noticed the word arrangement, as if I had renegotiated a contract they believed existed. A week later, she had texted, Brittany says she hardly hears from you lately. I hope the wedding isn't making you resent everyone who needs something from you. I had answered, I spoke to Brittany yesterday. Mom never responded. I showed Nathan. She was already trying to connect the wedding, Brittany, and the boundary. He read the messages. Before the dress. Yes. I kept scrolling. There was another message from Mom 10 days before the wedding. She had asked whether I could review an insurance renewal notice. I told her I could explain which number to call, but I would not handle it for her. Her reply had been, I understand. We're all learning where we stand with you. I remembered reading that at work and refusing to answer because I knew any reply would become another argument. Now the sentence looked different. Where we stand with you, not where the insurance issue stands, not what the boundary covers. Where we stand. You know what's strange? I said. Nathan closed his laptop. What? If I really wanted to punish them, I could have. With money? With access, time, everything. I gestured toward the records on the screen. I could have said I was done with all of them. I didn't. I said I wasn't automatically paying for things or doing work adults could do themselves. Nathan nodded, and Mom kept translating that into rejection. Yes. Why? That was the question. The obvious answer was money. But the numbers did not support money as the whole explanation. I had already gone through almost 9 years of transfers and direct payments. The cash support was meaningful, but not enough to make my parents dependent on me for basic survival. Dad still worked full-time in commercial property maintenance management. Mom had retired from an administrative position 2 years earlier and received a pension in addition to their savings. Their house was not paid off, but the mortgage was manageable. They were not poor. What they had was a habit of spending close to the edge of comfortable. Dad liked replacing vehicles before he needed to. Mom liked vacations that were always just a little more expensive than originally planned. They helped Brittany more than they admitted. When something unexpected happened, they had grown used to a pressure release valve. Me. Sometimes that meant money. More often it meant labor. I could negotiate with a contractor. I could read an insurance statement. I could catch a billing error. I could call 3 vendors during my lunch break and tell Dad which one had the best terms. I could loan Brittany enough to prevent a late fee before Mom had to rearrange her own budget. None of those things made me their provider. Together, they made me convenient. Losing me as a safety net would hurt. But inconvenience still did not explain the wedding. I don't think this is primarily financial, I said. Nathan nodded slowly. I don't either. Then what? He was quiet. I knew he had an answer, but he was doing what he always did when he thought I needed to reach something myself. I hated that sometimes. You have a theory. I do. Say it. He looked at me. What happens to your mother's version of the family if you stop being difficult? I frowned. I am difficult. Nathan smiled. Sometimes. I'm serious. Sue and I. He leaned forward. You've told me the same pattern for years. Brittany screws something up. Your mother protects her. You object? Your mother says you're too harsh. Your dad asks you to smooth it over. Eventually, you either fix the practical problem or leave the conversation. Yes. What happens if you stop? They deal with it. That's the practical answer. I waited. Nathan continued. What happens to the story? That landed differently. I thought about Christmas. My graduation dinner. Brittany's apartment. The contractor. Every argument that had somehow ended with Mom explaining my personality to someone else. Controlling. Insensitive. Strong. Rigid. Judgmental. Overwhelmed. Stressed. Words flexible enough to sound compassionate and permanent enough to explain whatever I did next. If I stop, I said slowly, then they have to explain why I stopped. Nathan nodded. And Lauren finally realized she was doing too much for us isn't a great explanation. No, especially if you get married, build your own life, and seem perfectly happy. I looked at him. There it was. The wedding did matter, just not for the reason I had assumed. It was not simply a stage for Brittany. It was a dividing line. I was forming a household with Nathan. I had made it clear that my time, money, and energy would no longer flow automatically toward every family problem. If I did that calmly, and then went on with my life, extended family might eventually ask the obvious question. What happened? And if I was not screaming, unstable, jealous, or cruel, Mom would have less control over the answer. I stood and walked toward the kitchen because sitting suddenly felt impossible. That is insane. Nathan followed me with his eyes. Which part? The idea that somebody would provoke a scene at their daughter's wedding just to make a story believable. I didn't say that's definitely what happened. But you think it. I think your mother benefits from people believing your boundaries come from anger instead of judgment. I turned. Judgment? Your judgment. As in you looked at the family system and decided you didn't want to participate the same way anymore. I understood what he meant. A boundary based on clear judgment could not be soothed away. It could not be blamed on wedding stress. It could not be fixed by telling me to calm down. Anger was temporary. A decision was dangerous. I went back to the table. There's another part. What? Brittany. Nathan nodded. I thought about what my sister had told me at dinner. Mom repeatedly asking whether I looked down on her, whether Nathan had changed me, whether I thought I was better than the family. Those questions did not simply prepare Brittany for a dress conflict. They turned my boundary into something personal between sisters. If Mom makes this about Brittany, I said, then I'm not stepping back because they expect too much from me. You're stepping back because? I'm jealous, controlling, angry that Brittany gets attention. Nathan's expression tightened. And then every time they need something, they can say I'm punishing the family. The mechanism was so simple, I almost missed how effective it could have been. If Mom could convince everyone, including me, that my boundary was emotional retaliation, then the solution was not for them to become more responsible. The solution was for me to stop being angry, which meant resuming the old pattern would become proof that I had healed. He sat back. That's what the meeting is for. Nathan did not answer immediately. You think so? Mom's own words. The way she's using money and boundaries to punish everyone. She wants a family conversation. Diane and Paul are supposed to be there. Witnesses. Maybe. I corrected myself immediately. No, that's too strong. They might just be there because Mom thinks they can mediate. But she already primed Diane before the wedding. Paul already repeated her version to me afterward. Nathan nodded. So at minimum, she chose people who had heard her interpretation. Yes. I looked again at Mom's message. We need the family united before this gets worse. That phrase used to work on me. United. Peace. Family. They sounded like values nobody decent should oppose. But unity in my family usually meant one thing. The person creating discomfort had to stop. Not the person creating the problem. The person naming it. I thought about Dad. His role became clearer too. For years, I had given him more credit because he did not start most confrontations. He ended them. Or claimed to. Your mother shouldn't have said that, but Brittany made a mistake, but you're right, Lauren, but the sentence after, but always required something from me. Apologize. Let it go. Pay it this time. Call the company. Do it for me. Dad did not need Mom's psychological need to control the family story. He had his own motive. If I stopped being the difficult daughter and became simply the daughter who had been doing too much, then he had to look directly at how much he had allowed me to carry. I remembered his birthday 3 years earlier. Their roof had needed emergency work that fall. Insurance eventually covered most of it. But there had been a deductible and a gap before reimbursement. I paid part of that gap so the repair would not be delayed. 2 months later, at Dad's birthday dinner, he gave a little toast. He thanked Mom. He thanked friends. Then he put his arm around Brittany and said, "This one always knows how to make her old man feel loved." Brittany had bought him a framed photograph from a family vacation. It was a thoughtful gift. I did not resent her for it. What I remembered was Mom leaning toward me afterward when she noticed my face. "You don't need praise for every little thing you do." Every little thing. At the time, I had hated myself for caring. I had money. Brittany had given him something personal. Why was I keeping score? So I let it go. Again, now, sitting at my dining table years later, I saw the uglier truth. Dad liked relying on me. He did not like feeling reliant. Those were different things. If he called me capable, I could solve the problem without him having to feel dependent. If I later pointed out the imbalance, he could accuse me of thinking I was better than everyone else. My competence became both the reason he used me and the reason he resented me. Nathan watched my face. "What?" "I think I finally understand, Dad. That sounds ominous. He needs me to be arrogant." Nathan frowned. "Explain." "If I'm arrogant, then when I help him, I'm just showing off that I know more. And when you stop, I'm punishing him because I like having control. So he never has to admit he depended on you." Yes. The thought hurt. More than anything I had discovered about Mom. Because for years, I had thought Dad was the one who saw what happened and simply did not know how to stop it. It was easier to forgive weakness than participation. But telling Brittany not to change the dress was participation. Telling her to let me get angry was participation. Warning me not to make a scene before I spoke was participation. He had not been standing between Mom and me. He had been helping maintain the distance while pretending to manage it. I did not sleep much that night. The next morning, I opened the financial timeline again. This time, I did not look at it as evidence against my parents. I looked at it as evidence against myself. There were places where I could have said no years earlier. I did not. There were problems I took over without even being asked properly. I did that too. There were times Brittany called Mom first, Mom called me, and I handled the issue without requiring Brittany to speak to me directly. I had helped create the system. Not the favoritism, not the manipulation, but the expectation that I would absorb consequences. That part was mine. The realization felt strangely freeing. Because if part of the pattern existed through my participation, then I did not need my parents to agree before I changed my part. I created a simple document. Not a legal file, not an invoice, just a factual summary for myself. Dates of direct payments, what each payment was for, whether it had been repaid. Separate from that, a list of recurring tasks I had taken over. Insurance calls, contractor disputes, billing corrections, travel arrangements, paperwork, helping Brittany move, reviewing leases. I did not attach a dollar amount to my time. I did not inflate anything. I did not include gifts. I did not include meals. I did not include things I had freely chosen to give, with no expectation of repayment. By the time I finished, the records supported exactly what I had already suspected. My family had not been living off me. They had been living more comfortably because they believed my resources could absorb their mistakes. The cash I had actually put in over 9 years landed in the mid-$40,000 range before repayments were accounted for. Meaningful, not catastrophic. Enough to matter. Not enough to claim I had financed their lives. That distinction made the truth stronger, not weaker. I did not need exaggeration. That afternoon, Mom finally contacted me directly about the meeting. Her text arrived at 2:16. "We need to sit down as a family Sunday. This situation has gone on long enough. Diane and Paul are willing to come so everyone can feel heard." Everyone. I looked at the wording. not to determine what happened. To feel heard. I answered. What situation? Mom replied almost immediately. Lauren, please don't do this. Do what? You know what this is about. I want you to tell me. Several minutes passed. Then, the wedding. Brittany, the distance you've created. Your decision to withdraw support from the family. All of it is connected whether you want to admit that or not. I stared at the message. There it was in writing. Not after I accused her. Not inferred from something Brittany remembered. Mom herself had linked them. I took a screenshot. Then I answered. My decision about financial and administrative help was made 6 weeks before the wedding. She wrote. That doesn't mean the feelings behind it started that day. I read the sentence 3 times. It was an almost perfect example of how Mom worked. If chronology contradicted her, she moved beneath chronology. The event did not matter. The hidden feeling did. And because the hidden feeling existed inside me, she could define it however she wanted. I typed, what feelings? Her answer came quickly. Resentment. The sense that we value Brittany more. Your need to control situations when you feel overlooked. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to save this family before pride ruins it. My hands went cold. There was enough truth in the first part to make the rest dangerous. Yes, I had resented the favoritism. Yes, I had felt overlooked. Yes, I could become controlling when I believed something important was being mishandled. Those were real flaws. Mom had built her version out of real material. She just attached the wrong cause to the wrong decisions. I had not stopped helping because Brittany was favored. I stopped because the help had become expected. I had not reacted at the wedding because I needed all the attention. I reacted because my sister wore white, and my mother tried to put her before me in the processional. But Mom's version was emotionally neater. Lauren has always been jealous of Brittany. Lauren got married and became more controlling. Lauren stopped helping. Lauren embarrassed Brittany. Therefore, all of it came from the same wound inside Lauren. And if that story became accepted, nobody ever had to ask what my parents had done. I showed the exchange to Nathan that evening. He read it slowly. She finally said it. Yes, not everything. No, but enough. I sat beside him on the couch. I think I know what the meeting is. What? On intervention. He frowned. Not a real one. No, not clinical. Family style. Meaning? They're going to tell me I'm hurting everyone. Brittany's supposed to be the injured party. Mom gets to be the mother trying to save the family. Dad gets to be the calm mediator. Diane and Paul make it feel neutral. And you? I'm supposed to explain myself until one explanation satisfies them. Nathan looked at me. Which explanation would satisfy them? I already knew. That I'm angry. He nodded. Because anger can pass. Yes. And a decision? Has to be respected. That was the real threat. Not that I would stop loving them. Not even that I would stop seeing them. That I had made a decision they could not talk me out of by redefining my emotions. I thought about canceling the meeting. For an hour, that felt like the healthiest option. I had no obligation to sit in a room while 6 adults discussed my personality. Then I thought about Diane's email, Paul's version, Dad's text, Brittany's messages, Mom's newest text. If I did not go, Mom would have an easy ending. Lauren refuses to talk. Lauren is shutting everyone out. Lauren has become impossible since the wedding. For the first time, though, I did not want to attend because I needed to convince everyone. That distinction mattered. I wanted to hear exactly what Mom would say when she believed the room had already been prepared for her version. I wanted Dad to answer questions without a private phone call he could end when they became uncomfortable. And I wanted Brittany to hear the same answers I heard. I texted her, "Are you still going Sunday?" She replied, "Yes." "Do Mom and Dad know you showed me the messages?" "No." "Don't tell them." There was a pause. Then, "Okay." I called Diane. She answered cautiously. "Hi. Are you going Sunday?" "Yes." "Did Mom tell you what the meeting is about?" She said the family needs to address what happened at the wedding and some issues that started before it. "Did she mention money?" A pause. "Yes." "What did she say?" "That you've been withdrawing support because you feel taken for granted." That surprised me. That's almost accurate. She didn't say it like it was accurate. "Of course not." Diane Sahil. She said she thinks you're using money to force people to admit they've treated Brittany better. I closed my eyes. There was the escalation. I had never made that demand. Not once. Did you ask her where she got that? I did. And? She said, I know my daughter. I almost laughed. Dad had used the same phrase. They knew me so well that apparently neither needed me present to explain my own motives. Diane, I need one favor. What? On Sunday. Don't defend me. She sounded surprised. Lorraine. I mean it. Don't correct Mom. Don't mention the email. Let her talk. Why? Because every time someone interrupts her, she changes what she was about to say. Diane went quiet. You want her to commit to the story. Yes. It was the most operational thing I could have said. And for once, I did not feel ashamed of that part of myself. I was not going to ambush my family. I was not fabricating evidence. I was not inviting strangers. I was going to sit in my parents' living room with the same people Mom had selected and let everyone speak for themselves. After I hung up, Nathan looked at me from across the room. You're going? Yes. Do you want me there? Mom invited you. That wasn't my question. I thought about it. Yes. But I don't want you fighting for me. I won't. If Dad tries to make this about you changing me, I'll tell him it was your decision. And then stop. Nathan nodded. I put the thin folder with my financial timeline on the table. Beside it, I placed printed copies of the relevant messages. Not everything. Only what I could actually prove. The April boundary text. Diane's original email. Dad's messages to Brittany showing he knew about the white dress and told her not to change. Mom's message after the wedding connecting my boundaries to punishment. And her text to me that afternoon doing the same thing directly. The raw wedding footage stayed on my laptop. I did not plan to play it unless someone lied about what I had done. That was the difference between evidence and revenge I was finally learning. Evidence did not have to be used just because I possessed it. It only had to exist when the truth needed protection. Sunday afternoon, Nathan and I drove to my parents' house. The same house where I had announced my boundary 8 weeks earlier. The same dining room where Dad had pushed his insurance notice toward me. The same covered porch where I had overheard Mom telling Diane she was worried about how I was acting. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw Brittany's car already there. Diane's too. Paul had parked along the curb. Nathan turned off the engine. You still want to do this? I looked at the house. For most of my life, entering that place after an argument meant preparing an explanation. This time, I had none. I'm not going in there to defend myself first. Nathan waited. I picked up the folder. I want Mom and Dad to tell their whole version before they know what I have. Then I opened the car door. I had expected Mom to seat everyone around the dining table because that was where serious conversations usually happened in our family. Instead, she had arranged the living room like a mediation. Dad sat in his usual chair near the fireplace. Mom was on the couch. Brittany sat at the far end. Diane had the armchair by the window. And Uncle Paul stood when Nathan and I came in. Then seemed to think better of greeting me too warmly and sat back down. The room smelled faintly of the lemon furniture polish Mom used whenever she wanted the house to look especially presentable. Even for a family intervention, presentation mattered. Mom looked at the folder in my hand. What's that? I sat in the empty chair opposite my parents and placed the folder on my lap. Something I brought. Her expression tightened. We're not here to litigate the family. I had not even opened it. I looked at Nathan, but he stayed quiet exactly as I had asked. I thought we were here so everyone could feel heard. Mom folded her hands. That's what I said. I nodded. Then go ahead. That unsettled her more than an argument would have. Dad leaned forward. Lauren, nobody is trying to gang up on you. We just think things have gotten out of hand. I asked what things. Mom sighed as if even that question exhausted her. The wedding was the breaking point. You humiliated your sister in front of everyone. You could have handled the dress privately. Instead, you took a microphone, brought Brittany forward, handed her your bouquet, and made a spectacle out of the family. I looked at Brittany. She was staring down at her hands. Dad added, Nobody is saying the dress was a good decision. Mom glanced at him, but he continued. It wasn't. But your reaction was disproportionate. I stayed quiet. That was harder than it looked. Every sentence they gave me contained something I could correct, qualify, or challenge. Normally, I would have interrupted before the third one. This time, I wanted the whole version before I touched it. Mom took my silence as permission to continue. And this isn't only about the wedding. You've become distant. You've turned normal family support into some kind of accounting system. Brittany feels judged. Your father feels like asking for help is humiliating. Every boundary you set makes the rest of us sound like we've been taking advantage of you for years. Dad nodded. No one is asking you to pay everybody's bills. I haven't said anything yet. He stopped. Mom's eyes flashed. That right there. You wait for someone to phrase something imperfectly so you can pounce on it. I'm listening. The room went still for a moment. Diane stared at her hands. Paul shifted in his chair. Brittany finally looked up. Mom leaned back and changed direction. I think you've resented your sister for years. You think we favor her. You think she gets away with things you never did. You think we expect more from you because you're capable, and instead of admitting that hurt you, you turn it into control. Yes, I said. Mom blinked. Yes, I think you favored Brittany. Yes, I think you expected more from me because I was capable. Yes, I resented that sometimes. And yes, I can be controlling. Dad frowned. Then you understand what we're saying. No. He looked genuinely confused. I understand the facts Mom is using. I don't agree with the conclusion. Mom leaned forward. You cannot separate them. You stopped helping this family because you were angry about how we treated Brittany. That was the sentence I had been waiting for. I opened the folder. When did I tell you I was changing what I would help with? Mom's face changed slightly. Lauren, don't do this. The date. Dad said. Why does that matter? Because Mom just said I stopped helping because I was angry about Brittany. You were already angry about Brittany, he said. Based on what? Mom answered before he could. Years of resentment. I pulled out the printed family text. April 18th. 6 weeks before the wedding. I passed it to Paul first. He read it, then handed it to Diane. The message was exactly what I had written that night. I was no longer fronting money for routine expenses or automatically taking over bills, insurance calls, contractor issues, or paperwork other adults could reasonably handle themselves. Real emergencies were different. Old help did not need to be repaid. I was simply changing what I took responsibility for going forward. Dad looked irritated. We remember. Good. Brittany wore white on May 30th, so the boundary cannot logically be retaliation for what happened at the wedding. Mom crossed her arms. I never said it started because of the wedding. You said all of this was connected. It is. How? Because the resentment behind it was already there. I nodded slowly. That's what I wanted you to say. Dad gave a short, angry laugh. This is ridiculous. I turned to him. When did you know Brittany was wearing white? The room changed. He looked at Brittany. Brittany looked back at him. Mom said, Why are we doing this? I kept my eyes on Dad. He sighed. I knew she had a light-colored dress. Did you see it? His face went still. Mom turned sharply toward Brittany. What did you show her? Brittany said. I showed Dad. I pulled out the screenshot. You told her, you look beautiful. Don't change now. We don't need another issue today. Paul leaned forward. Diane looked at Dad. Mom said quickly, That proves nothing. It proves he saw the dress. It proves he saw his daughter dressed for a wedding. He saw her dressed in white for my wedding. Dad shook his head. You're making it sound like I picked it. I didn't say you did. I said you knew. I placed the second screenshot on the coffee table, and then you wrote, Whatever happens, don't apologize right now. If Lauren gets angry, let her. We need to get everyone through the ceremony. Dad looked at Brittany. You sent those to her? Yes. Why? Because you told both of us you were trying to keep the peace, and now I know you were preparing me for Lauren's reaction before she even saw the dress. Dad's voice hardened. I was trying to prevent a disaster. By telling her not to change? I asked. She was already on her way. She sent you the photo at 11:14 that morning. The ceremony started at 4. He had hours. Dad looked away. Mom cut in. Craig was supporting Brittany. That's all. I pulled out Diane's email. Mom's expression changed before Diane even touched it. Diane read it aloud. Just a heads up about tomorrow. Lauren has been unusually sensitive where Brittany is concerned. If she gets upset, please don't take sides or encourage her. Craig and I are trying to handle this privately. I'm hoping everyone can stay calm and help us keep the day peaceful. Paul looked at Mom. When did you send that? The night before the wedding, Diane answered. Mom straightened. I was worried. About what? I asked. About exactly what happened. That's the problem. No, it isn't. You warned Diane I might get upset about Brittany before Brittany walked into my wedding wearing white. Dad told Brittany to let me get angry before I even saw her. Then when she arrived, you immediately suggested she walk before me. Mom snapped. Because I thought it would diffuse the situation. I stared at her. You thought putting a woman dressed in white into the processional ahead of the bride would diffuse the situation? Paul looked away. Dad rubbed his forehead. Mom's face flushed. You were already staring at her like you wanted to explode. I opened my laptop. Mom stopped talking. Dad said, "What is that?" The raw ceremony footage. I only need 30 seconds. I turned the screen toward the room and played the clip. Brittany entered. Mom's recorded voice said, "She should walk before you. It'll be beautiful." On screen, I said nothing. Dad moved toward me. Lauren, don't make a scene. I paused the footage. What had I done? Dad stared at the screen. Nothing yet. Yet. Brittany closed her eyes. I pressed play again. Mom said, "It's a dress, Lauren. Please don't turn this into something it isn't." Again. Before I had reacted, I closed the laptop. That's what the footage proves. You weren't responding to a scene, you were anticipating one. Mom crossed her arms. We know you. No, you know the role you expect me to play. Dad scoffed. I turned toward Paul and Diane. Mom told you I was withdrawing support because I felt overlooked, right? Diane nodded reluctantly. Paul said, "She said you were using money to force the family to admit they favored Brittany." I never said that. Mom answered immediately. You didn't have to. I looked at her. That is the problem. You keep telling people what I mean instead of asking me. I'm your mother. That doesn't make you the narrator of my life. Mom's face changed. You think I've spent 38 years lying about you? No. I think you've spent years interpreting me in ways that preserve the version of this family you need. Brittany needs protecting. I need managing. Dad keeps the peace. You hold everyone together. Mom laughed without humor. That's incredibly self-important. Maybe. But look at what happens if I stop being the problem. Nobody spoke. If I calmly stop paying routine expenses and fixing adult problems, people might ask why I was doing so much in the first place. If I get married and build a normal life with Nathan, the story that he changed me stops working. And if Brittany and I speak directly, instead of letting you explain us to each other, every disagreement stops being proof that I'm jealous of her. Mom stared at me. You really think this was all some plan to make you look bad? No. That surprised her. I don't think you planned every second. I don't think you positioned cameras or told anyone to secretly record me. You didn't need to. You prepared people to expect me to be the problem. You encouraged Brittany to continue with something you knew could provoke me. And when it happened, both of you were ready before I reacted. Mom's voice dropped. Why would we want our own daughter upset at her wedding? So that when I pulled back afterward, everyone could believe I was doing it because I was angry. For once, nobody interrupted. I opened the folder one final time and placed the financial summary on the table. This is not a bill. It's a record. Actual transfers, direct payments, and emergency expenses over roughly 9 years. I left out gifts, meals, and the hours I spent on calls and paperwork. Dad scanned the page. His face changed when he saw the total. It's in the mid-$40,000 range before repayments are accounted for, I said. You didn't live off me, and I'm not pretending you did. But over 9 years, my money and my ability to fix things became a cushion everyone expected to be there. Dad reminded me that some of it had been repaid, and that I had offered to help. "You're right," I said. "I chose to step in too often. Sometimes I solved problems before anyone else had to. That part is mine. So I'm correcting my part." The relief vanished. "I'm not asking for repayment. I'm not suing anybody. I'm not sending this to relatives. I'm simply stopping the automatic rescue." Mom shook her head. "That is punishment." "No. You're withholding help because you're angry." "No. I'm letting adults handle their own lives. Family helps each other. Family can help each other. Family does not get permanent access to one person's time and money," Dad said. "Nobody said permanent." "Then this should be easy." He went quiet. I turned to Brittany. "What did Mom tell you I said about you?" Mom snapped. "We are not doing this." Brittany looked at her. "Yes, we are." She took out her phone. "You told me Lauren thought I was irresponsible and selfish and that she was tired of cleaning up my life." "I never said that," I told her. Mom said, "That was the implication." Brittany stared at her. "You also told me she said I would never be able to take care of myself." Mom's voice sharpened. "I was trying to make you understand how she saw you, but she didn't say it." Mom hesitated. "No." The silence after that was different. Brittany looked at me. "I knew wearing the dress would bother you, and I did it anyway. That part is mine. I'm sorry." I held her gaze. "Thank you." Mom laughed bitterly. "So now you two team up and make us the villains?" Brittany shook her head. "No." Mom blinked. "I'm not taking Lauren's side." Brittany picked up her phone. "I'm taking mine. If you tell me Lauren said something about me, I'm asking her directly. If you tell Lauren I said something, she can ask me. You don't get to translate us anymore." Dad stood. "That is enough." Brittany looked at him. "You don't either." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "After everything we've done for both of you." For years, that sentence would have pulled me straight into repair mode. I would have softened, explained, reassured, maybe even apologized for how the truth had made her feel. This time I closed the folder. Nathan stood beside me. Mom looked at him. "You're really going to let her do this?" He answered calmly. "It was her decision before I met half of you." Dad looked at me. "So that's it?" "No, it means things are going to be different." Mom wiped beneath one eye. "What does that mean?" "I'm not cutting you off. I'm also not negotiating the boundary again." Dad scoffed. "You expect us to pretend this isn't punishment?" "I don't need you to pretend anything." That was the moment I finally understood the difference. A boundary did not become real when the other person agreed with it. It became real when I followed it anyway. Nathan and I walked toward the front door. Dad followed us into the hallway. "Lauren." I stopped. His voice was lower now. "What are we supposed to do when something actually goes wrong?" The question hurt more than anything he had said all afternoon. Not because it was cruel, because it was honest. I turned toward him. "The same thing I do. Figure out who is responsible. Call the right person. Make a decision. Handle it." He stared at me. "You make that sound easy." "No." I opened the door. "I make it sound like adulthood." We drove home mostly in silence. I did not feel victorious. I felt exhausted. Something had ended in that living room, but it was not my relationship with my parents. It was my belief that if I explained myself precisely enough, they would eventually admit what they had done. They might never admit it, and I no longer needed that admission to decide what I would do next. When we got home, I put the folder in my office drawer. I did not send the evidence to the family group chat. I did not post the wedding footage. I did not call more relatives to defend myself. For the first time in years, I had enough evidence to keep arguing, and I chose to stop. I thought that would be the hardest part. It wasn't. The harder part came 3 weeks later, when Dad called me with a problem I could have solved in less than 10 minutes. 3 weeks after the meeting at my parents' house, Dad called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was finishing work. I almost ignored it because I had a vendor review starting in 15 minutes, but he called again immediately. For most of my adult life, 2 calls in a row from Dad meant something had gone wrong and I was about to become involved. My body reacted before my brain did. I closed the spreadsheet on my screen, reached for a notebook, and answered with my pen already in my hand. "Dad, I need your help with something." There it was. Not hello. Not how are you. The old opening. I looked at the notebook in front of me. What happened? He had received a notice about an insurance renewal connected to the house. One section confused him, and he was worried that if he answered incorrectly, their premium might increase. He had already tried calling once, spent 12 minutes on hold, and hung up. As he explained, I understood the problem almost immediately. It was not complicated. He needed to call the customer service number listed near the bottom of the second page. Ask whether the roof work from the previous year had already been updated in their property file, and confirm which documentation they still required. If he had the contractor invoice and completion certificate available, the entire thing might take 10 minutes. My hand was already moving toward my keyboard. I stopped. That tiny movement told me more about myself than the entire family meeting had. I was preparing to solve it before Dad had even finished describing it. Do you have the notice in front of you? I asked. Yes. Go to the second page. Paper rustled on his end. Okay. Near the bottom there should be a customer service number. I see it. Call that number. Tell them you're responding to the renewal questionnaire, and ask whether last year's roof replacement is already in their system. Have the contractor invoice ready, in case they want the completion date. Dad was quiet. That's it? That should get you the answer. Another pause. Can't you just call? You know what to ask. The sentence was so familiar that for a second I saw us back at the dinner table in April. His phone pushed toward me. It'll take you 10 minutes. I looked at my laptop. I could have solved the problem faster than explaining why I would not. That was always the trap. Efficiency made saying yes feel rational. I just told you what to ask. I know, but you're better at this. I probably am. He sounded surprised by my agreement. That's why I'm asking. And I'm telling you how to handle it. His voice hardened slightly. So this is still happening. I knew what he meant. The boundary. As if we had all been waiting for my anger to wear off and normal service to resume. Yes, Lauren, I'm not asking for money. I know. This is a phone call. I know. You're proving your point over a phone call? No, I'm following through over a phone call. He exhaled heavily. For a moment, I almost changed my mind. I pictured him sitting at the kitchen table with paperwork spread around him, annoyed by a process I could navigate easily. There was nothing noble about making someone struggle unnecessarily. Then I remembered the actual problem. Dad was not unable. He was inconvenienced. Those were not the same thing. The number is on the notice, I said. You have the documents. If they ask something you genuinely don't understand after you speak to them, text me the exact question and I'll tell you what it means. But I'm not taking over the call. Dad went silent. Then he said, Your mother was right. You have changed. A few months earlier, that sentence would have felt like an accusation. This time, it did not. Yes, I said. I have. He ended the call shortly after that. I did not call back. That was harder than anything I had said during the family meeting. The confrontation had been dramatic enough to keep me focused. This was ordinary. There was no audience, no folder, no video. No aunt watching my mother contradict herself. There was only an insurance notice and a habit. That was where change actually lived. Dad handled the renewal. I know because he texted me 2 days later. Taken care of. I replied, Good. Nothing else. No praise for doing something adults do every day. No sarcasm either. I was trying to learn the difference between refusing responsibility and punishing someone for finally taking it. The practical consequences came slowly. That mattered. My parents did not suddenly lose their house because I stopped answering insurance calls. They were not ruined. No one was sleeping in a car or begging for groceries. Their life simply became less cushioned. Dad postponed replacing his SUV. The one he had was 7 years old and still worked perfectly well, but he had been talking about upgrading before the end of summer. That stopped. Mom and Dad canceled a fall trip they had been planning because the combination of airfare, hotel costs, and another home expense made it uncomfortable. Mom complained to Diane that they were having to rethink everything because family support isn't what it used to be. Diane told me that once. I asked her not to tell me again. Not because I was ashamed, because I realized hearing every complaint was another form of involvement. I did not need a weekly report proving the boundary was having an effect. Brittany changed too, although not all at once. The first time she called me after the meeting, she started the conversation with, "I need advice, not money." I laughed. That sounded rehearsed. It was. What happened? She had received a repair estimate for her car and wanted to know whether the price seemed reasonable. Normally, I would have asked her to send me everything and then contacted 2 shops myself. Instead, I told her how I would compare the estimate. She called 2 other places. One was cheaper. She handled it. A week later, she texted me. "Turns out I can make phone calls too." I answered, "Proud of you." She replied, "Don't get condescending." That made me laugh harder than I expected. Our relationship did not transform into some perfect sisterhood. We still irritated each other. Brittany still thought I could turn a simple plan into a corporate procedure. I still thought she occasionally treated preparation like an optional personality trait. But something fundamental changed. If Mom told Brittany I had said something about her, Brittany called me. If Mom told me Brittany was upset, I texted Brittany directly. Most of the time, the answer was embarrassingly simple. "No, I didn't say that." "No, I'm not mad." "No, that isn't what happened." Once, Brittany called me after Mom told her I had complained that she had not apologized enough for the wedding. "Did you say that?" "No." "Okay. That's it?" "That's it." Then she added, "This is much faster." She was right. Without Mom standing between us, half our conflicts disappeared before they could become conflicts. The other half were at least ours. Mom hated that. She called Brittany one evening, about a month after the family meeting, and told her I was tearing the family apart. I did not hear the call. Brittany told me about it later when we were having lunch. According to her, Mom said I was forcing everyone to choose sides, and that Brittany was enabling me by refusing to defend our parents. Brittany said she asked one question: "How much money has Lauren actually given you over the years?" Mom told her that was private and beside the point. Brittany said, "Then stop using me to explain why she stopped." Mom accused her of choosing me. Brittany told me she answered, "No, I'm choosing not to be used by you." I believed her because by then I had watched her make that choice in smaller ways. She stopped carrying messages. She stopped letting Mom tell her what I meant. She stopped using me as the standard against which every one of her mistakes had to be judged. That was probably the consequence Mom understood least. For years, Brittany had been useful to her in a different way than I had. I was useful because I solved problems. Brittany was useful because she validated the story. If Brittany needed protection, Mom got to be the protecting mother. If I objected, Mom got to be the peacemaker. Once Brittany stopped accepting that arrangement, Mom lost the role that made hers work. Dad struggled with it differently. He became quieter. For several weeks, I heard from him only when something practical required an answer he could not reasonably get elsewhere. The first time he asked me a question after actually calling the company himself, I helped. That was important to me. I had never intended to become a woman who refused every favor just to prove independence. The boundary was not, "I will never help you again." It was, "I will not automatically become responsible." That difference was the entire point. Some relatives never understood. Uncle Paul apologized for repeating Mom's version of the wedding, but another aunt remained distant. She told Diane she thought I had become too transactional, and that families should not need documentation to love each other. For a while, I wanted to call her. I had the evidence. I could have explained everything in 10 minutes, maybe 20. Then I realized I was doing it again, trying to fix someone's understanding because I could. So I let her be wrong. That was new too. By August, a little over 2 months after the wedding, life had become quieter. Not healed. Quieter. Nathan and I settled into marriage without the dramatic transformation my mother had predicted. I did not abandon my family. Nathan did not isolate me. We went to work. We argued about whose turn it was to buy groceries. We spent a Sunday assembling shelves that should have taken an hour and somehow took 4. One evening, Nathan came home with a small bunch of flowers from the grocery store. Nothing bridal. Nothing expensive. Just white roses mixed with greenery. He put them on the kitchen counter and said, These looked like they'd survive you. I looked at him. That's romantic. You like durable systems. Stop. He laughed and went upstairs to change. I trimmed the stems and found a vase. For a second, holding the flowers in both hands, I remembered my wedding bouquet. Brittany's cold fingers around the stems. Mom's smile. Dad telling me not to make a scene. The camera recording while my parents waited for me to become the woman they had already described. I used to think that moment was when everything changed. It wasn't. The real change came later. In smaller moments, nobody filmed. When I did not call Dad's insurance company. When Brittany asked me directly what I had said. When Mom cried and I did not rush to repair the feeling. When a relative misunderstood me and I did not spend my evening drafting a correction. When I helped because I chose to, not because being capable made the problem mine. I put the flowers into the vase and turned it slightly until they sat the way I liked. Then I stopped adjusting them. For most of my life, I had believed being needed was proof of being valued. I know better now. Being useful can feel a lot like love when you are the person everyone calls. But love that disappears the moment you stop providing a service was never as unconditional as you wanted to believe. My parents still tell themselves a version of the wedding that makes them more comfortable. I cannot control that. Brittany still has things to answer for. So do I. The difference is that none of us gets to outsource those answers anymore. If Mom says Brittany said something, I call Brittany. If Dad has a problem he can solve, I let him solve it. If I decide to help, I help because I want to. And if someone needs me to become the villain so they never have to examine what they asked of me, they are allowed to tell that story. I am simply no longer required to live inside it. You do not owe access to your time, money, or skills, just because you are capable. Family support is chosen, not assumed, and boundaries do not require unanimous approval to be valid. Ask people directly, instead of trusting someone else's version of them, and stop rescuing adults from consequences they can handle themselves. If this story gave you something to remember, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.